Order, order. Welcome to this joint session of the Public Accounts Committee and the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee on Wednesday, the 8th of July 2026. I'd like to thank my fellow chair, Simon Hall, for his committee's collaboration with us on this important matter of the ongoing failures of the Civil Service Pension Scheme. So before we start, I want to make clear that both committees sitting here agree with the Minister that the levels of service and experiences for members of the pension scheme over the past 7 months since the transition of provider to Capita have been entirely unacceptable. We also recognise that the current office is responsible for the ongoing issues with the scheme, many of which predate the transition to this provider. As you will no doubt be aware, this is a very distressing matter for many individuals, and we know that from our postbag. All members of Parliament know that. I know from my fellow committee members of the PACAC and PACAC regularly hear from retired scheme members who have been left struggling to make ends meet at a pivotal point in their life, causing them significant distress and anxiety. I'd like sincerely to thank every individual who has taken the time to write the committees to the committees on this issue, and indeed all of the staff who've had a really heavy workload in the last few days. It's much appreciated. Everybody who's helped with this hearing. So this afternoon we want to hear what responsibility the government has for this mess, how the Minister and Cabinet Office officials are holding Capita accountable for its service failures, how it is supporting affected individuals, and finally what consideration is giving to insourcing this vital service. So I think what I'm going to do is my normal practice and ask everybody, Minister, to introduce themselves, and that would be really helpful. If we could start with you, please, Nick.
So, Nick Thomas-Symonds, I'm the Paymaster General.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. We appreciate it. Kat, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. My name's Kat Little. I'm the Permanent Secretary of the Cabinet Office and the Chief Operating Officer for the Civil Service.
And Andrew?
Yeah, afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew Forzani. I'm the Government Chief Commercial Officer.
Thank you, Andrew. And finally, by no means least at all, Angela, please.
I am Angela MacDonald. I'm the Second Permanent Secretary for HMRC, and I've been leading the Recovery Task Force to support the Minister and the Permanent Secretary.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Am I on the right one? Yes. So, can you, Minister, perhaps the first question to you, please. Were all the services performing at normal levels by the end of June, as was promised by Capita in their hearing to us?
So the straight answer to that question, Sir Geoffrey Chair, is no, but I wonder if I could just give a brief opening statement, and then, of course, we will move to questions. Look, the simple truth of this, and I made that clear to the House in my statement on Monday, is the position we find ourselves in is not good enough. It's completely unacceptable. And I am deeply sympathetic to the many members of this scheme who've dedicated their careers to public service and have been treated, frankly, so poorly by this provider. So I'm afraid, yes, Capita has failed to meet its end of June milestone to return the scheme to required levels. And the figures I'm just about to give, Sir Geoffrey, are correct as of the 30th of June, but I will pass, if I may, to Angela in a moment just to give more context and detail to that. But we're talking of over 6,700 quotations have still not been dispatched for past retirement dates, and over 4,100 bereavement cases remain unresolved in the system. And frankly, these are grieving families, public servants who are facing serious illnesses, dealing with harrowing and difficult situations as it is, without having to deal with the delivery failure on top. I also wanted to say, Sir Geoffrey, that under my leadership, and I'm sure you'll appreciate, I've had this responsibility since September, the reshuffle last year. The government's been doing everything possible to manage the crisis and fix the issues on behalf of the scheme members. The moment we were alerted to these severe delivery challenges in January, I intervened immediately to establish the Cabinet Office Pensions Recovery Task Force, and I brought in Angela, who is Second Permanent Secretary of HMRC, to lead that. I also deployed urgently a 140-strong government surge support team directly into Capita to provide vital operational capacity. And obviously the priority then was to stabilise the service. I also established on an emergency basis a transitional support loan scheme and that has delivered around £15.6 million in interest-free funds to over 2,700 members experiencing payment delays. I've also ordered the team to take direct operational control of correspondence workflows, to establish virtual surgeries running every weekday, and we've delivered, I think, over 250 surgeries to support over 150 members of Parliament and caseworkers since launching at the end of May. Now, because of those interventions, in my view, and the work that Angela, the team, Kat and the team, and indeed Andrew, have done, we have seen an acceleration in the speed of quote issuance. I think we've stabilised the phone lines to achieve a much better average wait time. That isn't to say that bad experiences are still not being reported, but certainly the average wait time has gone from over an hour and a half to around about 3 minutes. But whilst I do think the emergency intervention has stabilised the service, and I dread to think, by the way, where we'd be without it, we cannot carry on like this, propping up a failed private contractor, and I will not have a situation where public money is funding corporate failing. So I will be fighting relentlessly for members to ensure we recover every single penny of the cost of these surge interventions from Capita. So over the next few months, our immediate focus is on executing robust commercial and operational pressure to clear the remaining backlogs and recover the service. But for the longer term, I do think the episode has vividly exposed the severe limitations of outsourcing the civil service pension scheme. We are executing our contractual rights at the moment to deploy independent technical auditors and an on-the-ground remedial advisor to pinpoint residual issues. And I'm actively, with my team, exploring all commercial, legal and operational options, including testing, which I know we'll come to in a moment, the long-term feasibility of a full in-house delivery model. I'll leave it there, Sir Geoffrey, because I know your members will want to discuss these issues, but I wonder if I may just ask Angela just to give some context to the updated picture before we move on.
Yeah, that's perfectly in order. Angela, please.
Thank you. So now I'm aware I don't want to give you a massive blizzard of figures because I'm able to answer so many of your data questions. So if at this point I stick to some fairly high level numbers and then no doubt colleagues will be able to ask me specifics as we go through, would that be an acceptable way to go in? Okay, so if we look at it sort of from the macro level, so how much work is in the whole system? Is progress being made? And what progress is being made against the inherited work? So we're in a situation at the moment where there was about 90,000 pieces of inherited work. And if you'll remember, colleagues, that is the 86,000. And then do you remember the 15,000 unopened emails that we discussed when we've been before? Well, out of that, about 4,000 pieces of work were sat inside there. So that's where 90,000 outstanding pieces of work comes from. Since then, since the 1st of December, just over 287,000 new pieces of work have arrived. The scheme is active, there's plenty of new work coming in. And that means that overall, 377,000 has gone into the machine in the round. Now, a lot has been processed. But as we sit here right now, there is 111,000 pieces of work to do sat inside the scheme. Now, no scheme is ever zero. So a normal head of work in a scheme like this would be about 55,000. So to give you a bit of a sense of where we are, we should be at 55,000 by now in a normal running, and we are at 111,700 at the 30th of June. I'm hoping, Chair, that I haven't lost you so far. Is that okay?
No, I'm with you.
We're all right, yeah. So again,
with
just to give you some sense of sort of where we find ourselves, we're at double where we should be at this situation. Now, in terms of the really particulars, so thinking about quotations, which are incredibly important here. So the Minister referenced 6,700 at the 30th of June. About 1,000 more have been issued since then. So we're at 5,700, and we expect about another 2,000 or so to go this week. But that would still leave about 4,000 members with past retirement dates. So the numbers we're quoting here are for retirement dates pre the 30th of June, not for retirements which are coming up, because obviously we've got more to do there. So there are still, as I sit here now, 5,700 members without a quote for a past retirement date. When we look at payments outstanding, there are 3,127 payments outstanding, and 1,800 of those people have been sat waiting for their payment for more than 30 days. So those get you to the sense of, I've sent my paperwork back, I don't know, I'm not getting my things through, so that's where we are on payments, again, as we're flowing through. And then when we look at bereavements, which is another key area, there are 16,876 in the bereavements queue. Now, 9,273 of those have got no money due. So that could be the death of a second spouse, or there is no dependent. So just over half of that, there's no further money due. However, 7,603 are families where further benefits are due. And of the people in that process, nearly 2,000 of those people have been sat in that queue for more than 4 months. 4 months. So again, progress has been made in all of these, but there remain significant volumes of families sat as yet unprocessed. And then, do you want me to stop so far, or do you want me to keep going?
Yes.
Keep going?
Yes,
okay.
keep going.
Okay. So for death in service cases, there are 618 outstanding death in service cases, of which 237 have been in the queue for more than 4 months. There are 429 ill health retirement cases, of which 131 have been sat there for more than 2 months. Now, I make the distinction because ill health retirement cases should flow through the system a lot faster, and therefore, because they enter the process at a slightly different point. But again, in all of those areas, lots of cases have been processed. However, there are still material pots of members and members' families who are yet to get all the way through. So I'll stop there, Chair, if that's okay. If you want to ask me on any other bits, I've got other data, but if that's a suitable, gives you the sense of the overall position, if that's useful for colleagues.
Could I issue a personal thank you to you, because I think without that surge team we would be in a far worse position than we are today, so a grateful thanks to you. I mean, I suppose a question to you, Minister, or indeed Angela. I mean, for everybody listening to these hearings today, I mean, I was slightly worried by your phrase, it will take many months to clear up the backlog. What is a realistic timetable when we're going to get back? I mean, the headline figure in there of Angela's figures was that you're running at 111,000 cases and a normal would be 55. So when are we going to get back to a normal running of a pension scheme of this type?
Could I perhaps start? And look, first off, I think I just want to be very, very clear. We've had 2 rectification plans with milestones in April and June. We have not met any of those residual milestones, just to be really, really clear about it. So I have asked Capita to provide us with a fully confident rectification plan, which has detailed assumptions, and asked the very simple question, why is it going to be different and believable this time? They are going to provide us with that detailed plan on the 14th of July. And you'll have an opportunity to ask them a bit more about the timescales. My understanding is that they are going to commit to some of the categories that Angela talked about being within normal service levels by the 1st of September, but more complex cases in October. We have got to take the rectification plan that Capita give to us, and we are going to have to assure every single detail and assumption in it to stress test whether or not we've got confidence in it. And that is exactly why the Minister has asked us to bring in independent auditors as well, so that we can actually look at the underlying systems and assumptions that are driving that plan.
So how can the poor pension scheme members have any more confidence in that than they've had in the past? After all, both of our committees in various ways have had promises from Capita that first they would get it back to service levels by March, then April, then May, and now they've missed and they looked us absolutely in the eye and said they understood the question to my deputy, they would get back to normal service level by June. How can we have any more confidence that this will happen?
I think that's a very fair challenge, Chair, frankly, and this is why, as the Permanent Secretary has said, we've gone further in terms of both putting the remedial advisor in. Secondly, also putting in independent auditors who, by the way, are not just looking at process and capability, because I think that is absolutely critical in terms of actually meeting milestones that have been set out by Capita, but also another dimension of that independent audit is look at data, tech and IT. So I am doing all I can beneath this to try to get assurance, but also, as the Permanent Secretary has said, simply tell us what needs to be true in order to meet that milestone, because my officials are in constant dialogue with Capita. So I think it's a very fair challenge given the two deadlines that have already been missed. But it's about trying to put some structure beneath that as well to try to give an assurance that that will be met. And if there is a concern at an earlier stage that it won't be met, to see what we can do as a team to try to come in and assist.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, Chair, I mean, practically on the ground, and I'm meeting with Capita every day, and my team are in there every day, we can absolutely see that delivery is accelerating. So the amount of production which is going out is accelerating every week. The problem is it's not yet accelerating fast enough. So to be balanced about, can we see that there is a potential route to get here? Yes, I can see that there's a potential route to get there. It's just that we shouldn't be taking anywhere near this long to get to the position that we should be in.
It gives us a little bit of hope, I think. Kat, I'm sorry to the committee, I've rather taken up too much time, but there is an important question I need to ask you on a clarification. You emailed civil servants yesterday, updating them on urgent actions underway to stabilise the civil service pension scheme. We've had correspondence from civil servants on this email, and they say in that email you directed members experiencing delay to the portal and case tracking feature on Capita's website. Apparently this feature does not work properly and never has, so why have you directed colleagues to a resource that doesn't exist?
I'm afraid that's not my understanding. Angela will have to
Yeah, I will. So,
verify that.
So the portal currently has a Track My Case facility. There are two, at the moment it's a fairly basic functionality. It basically recognises that there is a case there. So because if you remember perhaps for earlier hearings, there was lots of concerns that requests were going into a black hole. Nobody knew that there was even a request that has been there. So it basically, it very clearly says where you're at. It is, though, still quite basically, either says there's an open case for you or a closed case for you. Doesn't really tell you what all of the details are. There is a further update to go onto that portal, and we are trying to make sure that other resources, which, there is lots of things where people have questions. Well, Capita have updated with the website to look at most frequently asked questions, that kind of thing. So we're trying to offer a balance of people going online, where that is their preference, or ringing. But it is really important where the portal doesn't deliver for you. That is why, as the Minister mentioned about phone service, why it's so important that the phone service remains fit for purpose. Because if you're not able to get what you need on the portal, what you can't be doing is waiting 2 hours on the phone hoping that somebody's going to answer your question. So it isn't good enough yet, Chair, but it is part of a multi-delivery.
There's lots of questions that spring from almost everything you say, but we've got a lot of ground to cover. Clive wants to just one point of clarification, I think.
Maybe two of mine. First of all, what counts as a case completed? Because we're told over and over again that when someone gets information, a quote, or information about their pension sent out to them, it's then marked off as a case done, even if that information is proved to be inaccurate, and the individual has to go back to Capita and ask for it rechecking. Yep. But by then, the case is already dealt with, apparently. Now, are you taking account of that on the figures? Because otherwise, it's very easy to get the figures down simply by issuing wrong information quickly.
Yes, absolutely. So there are many. By far the majority of people ask for a quotation because they want to go into retirement, but not everybody does come back afterwards. So keeping a case open in perpetuity and doing sort of a retirement in the round means you end up with some gaps. So yes, a quote case is closed when it goes out. However, we are specifically tracking the escalations. So when people are coming back in saying, I don't agree with the quote, I don't like the quote, I've got a query on the quote, we are specifically tracking that activity because it's a key quality indicator. And obviously that means that those cases have got to be redone and we need to be tracking those.
It's interesting, but the feedback we have on escalations is they seem to go into a black hole and the only response is, we note your escalation, end of story. Now, are you really counting them and dealing with them?
Well, I can only rely on the data that I'm being provided by Capita, but if there are...
That's a problem, isn't it?
Potentially, but if there are... But definitely, if there are examples where where members have got those, then please do let me know and let me get to the bottom of it.
Okay. Right, Simon Hall, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all. Where does one start? So let's just take that as a key point. How confident are the four of you that Capita is operating a full, for want of a better phrase, open book approach and showing you as Cabinet Office and the Surge team everything?
I'll answer that in two ways. So I think we're confident they're giving us everything. Do we have confidence in the data and the management information that you would expect to see on a complex contract of this type? We are not fully confident in the data, and we have to do a lot of work with Capita to make sure that we have confidence and assurance in the information that we are being given. This was meant to be a Power BI self-service MI-enabled contract from day one. It is not. So there are lags in the data that we need, and the quality of what we're getting still needs significant assurance.
So, Mr. You take me on to my sort of follow-up question, which is, from memory, government awarded the contract to Capita principally because of their commanding narrative around digital data handling and AI. Either they lied to secure the contract, either they've been let down by a third-party supplier, or the scrutiny of Cabinet Office to double-check what they were being sold in the bidding prospectus wasn't done. It could be a lethal cocktail of all three. Which do you think it might be?
I give you some details of the procurement process that was undertaken then. So, as you say, as part of the evaluation, Capita made a series of commitments around the ability to deploy technology and automate this service.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we just clarify that, because words are important? To deploy a technology which they already had at hand, which had a proven track record of coping with the demands of the complexity of this sort of scheme, or something which was in an advanced evolutionary stage whereby this scheme was going to be a technological guinea pig?
It was a combination of both. So in terms of their proving their competence to take this contract on, they referenced schemes that they were already delivering in the public and private sector. It was a combination of systems that they were already using on those contracts, plus new technology that they promised to develop as part of this.
And in the promise to develop, there was an adequate, realistic window to develop that capability prior to the green light coming to them to operate the contract from day one.
There was a 2-year transition period, which was specifically to understand what they were taking on and to give them time to develop the IT solutions. So
and hindsight is, of course, the wonderful gift that we all wish we had when we were taking decisions. Are you, Mr. Forzani, convinced that sufficiently robust scrutiny by government during that 2-year window of technological development was scrutinised sufficiently in order to give government confidence that the capability would be there from day one?
We're assured that we asked the questions and we were given very strong assurances. And I'm sure we'll get into the kind of decisions to go live or not go live, where a lot of that focus was taken. I think as part of lessons learned, I think we absolutely need to reflect, could we have done more to assure ourselves of those promises and capabilities?
If I may,
yes,
Chair, apologies if it's okay just to add to that. I think if I go back to the three things that you set out, there are undoubtedly lessons learnt about the specialist capability we use to go and assure ourselves of precisely what was being developed and the quality of what was being developed. There's no doubt about that. But we were given very, very strong assurances that this technology would be available by now. It became very clear post-transition that that was not going to happen in the timescales that we were given assurances about. And we are still awaiting a good, confident technology rectification plan that we have confidence in, which is exactly why we're having to now bring in a remedial advisor to give advice on why this hasn't been delivered and what confidence we have that it can be.
But they weren't even that good, were they, on what might be described as the basics, dealing with members of Parliament raising cases on behalf of their constituents, answering the telephone and dealing with a call in a timely fashion, operating. I'm no IT person, but I don't think one could describe the operation of a portal as at the cutting edge of technological science. I mean, even just sort of some of the rather basic table stakes that you would expect from a large, mature organisation like Capita, they failed on singularly and significantly, did they not? Forget any of the cutting edge new stuff, just the basics they were useless at.
I entirely agree, and call centres are right at the heart of many of the services that large outsourcers like Capita deliver. Obviously, we are the recipient of call services from Capita in other parts of government and the public sector. This should not have been beyond their capability to deliver on day one.
And Chair, may I just ask Ms MacDonald just a final question on this section? Ms MacDonald, you very usefully gave the Joint Committee a series of very helpful figures and statistics. Behind each of those very large numbers, will we all know, lie an individual who has worked hard or who is going through the upset of bereavement, who is going through the most terrible time trying to get hold of something which is legitimately theirs. I think of my one constituent who's been to see me, who had to retell the story of her early bereavement 6 times, only to be told by one person, "Are you sure? Because you sound too young to be a widow." Not, I would suggest, acceptable from any organisation, still less something the size of Capita. So my question really is the human one, and it's one I actually asked the Minister on his useful statement in the House earlier this week. Are you persuaded or convinced that Capita understand the sensitive human nature of the issues that they have at hand? This is not data, this is not percentages, this is not numbers, this is not checklist. These are people who are racking up debt, who are worried they can or cannot pay their bills because their pension is not coming through, that they're not necessarily certain they can commit to funding a funeral in some instances where they're uncertain about the bereavement stuff. Does Capita get, and I'm sure it's a question I will ask Capita when they're before us later on this afternoon, does Capita get the human impact of their inaction and service failure, and is that in any way expediting their response? Or is it just data, dry data?
So I speak to Chris Clements, who is the lead for the Capita pensions virtually every day, every other day. And the only thing he and I talk about is the situation about the members. We don't talk about commercials, we don't talk about money, we don't talk about priorities in terms of we can't spend on this and we can't spend on that. The only thing we talk about is families, we talk about complaints that we're both seeing, we talk about particular cases that we're trying to fix. When I sit on the front line, and I think the awful experience that you have narrated there, you shared when we were before you, and I've been to the front line to sit with some incredibly hard-working frontline colleagues in Capita who are taking these phone calls every day, who are working their very hardest to be able to deliver. I think the core at a macro level is, as the Permanent Secretary mentioned, the technology is not yet where it needs to be. And so there is a challenge between, there's no point just being empathetic and sympathetic. We actually need to be able to do something for these people. And when you are not able to be in a situation where your technology means you can navigate your way out, then you can be left with lots of sympathy and empathy, but not actually being able to tackle the cases. And what those members want, they don't want sympathy and empathy. They want somebody to fix their case and get them sorted. So I absolutely know that from the very bottom to the very top, they understand. But they understand is only important when they understand turns into, and now we fixed it, and now we're doing stuff, which is the things that I flagged to you before.
I'm not particularly well known for being up to date with all the latest management speak. But you used the phrase there, Mr. MacDonald, our colleagues in Capita. Now, I presume you're not talking there about the surge team from HMRC. No. They are not your colleagues in Capita. They are a private business which His Majesty's government has contracted to provide a service. I would not call, with the greatest of respect to him, the man who comes to repair my boiler or repair my car, my colleague. I'm paying them to deliver a service. And could I just sort of suggest that the narrative or mindset of working with colleagues rather than failing service deliverers who are seeking to improve, I warrant that, we need to give the public confidence that your side of the table in all of this understand absolutely the professional, corporate, commercial relationship here. But colleagues, they are not.
I wouldn't want you to think, and perhaps Capita would be very clear, that in any way they are not feeling the strength of my 35 years of operational experience as I focus their minds on what it is that needs to be delivered. I have found, in my experience, that actually to drive forward, constantly yelling at them for 6 months probably wouldn't have made us get to where we need to get to. But
I wasn't suggesting
I
yelling.
agree. But
yelling.
But I honestly, Chair, I would not want you to think that there is any lack of significant pressure and holding to account being done by me and my team.
Thank you, Simon. I'm going to bring in Catherine in a minute, but this is a question for perhaps either Andrew or you, Angela. It seems to me absolutely critical to this whole thing that this IT is up to the job. When is that going to happen?
So that is, as Permanent Secretary mentioned, that is what the rectification plan needs to provide us with. We need to see, we need to be able to challenge, we need to be able to get the independent assessment that gives us the confidence that what they're telling us about the progress that is yet to be made on their IT is credible, funded, and that the assumptions are dependable. That is what we expect to get a plan for on the 14th of July, and then that is what we will be driving with the independent advisor to challenge on after that.
So these remedial specialists that the Minister talked about just now, will they be looking at that and assuring you and that... In
detail. This isn't a job for a generalist. The capability will be people who can really understand and critique a technology plan and be able to tell us that it is everything that it needs to be.
Thank you very much. Catherine, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the key performance indicators for the contract here. And key performance indicator 36 says that ill health retirement quotes should be provided 3 days from receipt of request. Can you explain, given that's the target Capita should be working for, how on earth we have so many of the most urgent and most sensitive cases still outstanding? And just to reflect my colleague's point, I raised a case of someone terminally ill that has been seeking their quote since January, who died at the weekend. They still haven't got it. How is that happening? I appreciate in the grand scheme there are many of these quotes to process, but how are they, people dying, not getting their quotes?
It is simply unacceptable that is the situation. There is no in any way
okay.
reasonable
Well,
experience.
given the key performance indicators, what penalties have been levied for that breach in particular, which is so egregious and unforgivable?
So, and Andrew should add to this on the commercial side, but just to go back to the KPIs, there are 25 KPIs. We are expecting them to currently fail, 21. We are currently expecting for them to fail 16 of them this month. And to go back to what Angela described at the start, because they are not at the pace they need to move through the processing of the work, the backlog is just getting higher and higher. So my expectation is that this trend worsens and worsens unless something radically shifts in their ability to tackle the most important, urgent, high priority work that they should be prioritising. And ill health, bereavement, we have made very, very clear are the priority cases we expect to have the absolute focus of their attention. So right here, right now, we withheld £9.9 million of transitional funding, and we are undertaking a significant commercial exercise to calculate the service credits due to those significant KPI failures that we now expect to true up in a grand commercial negotiation. So to go back to what the Minister has said, we will not have a situation where hard-working taxpayers are using their funds to subsidise a failing contract, and ultimately it's our job with our commercial teams to make sure that we go after every single penny.
And just if I could come in on that, because my very clear and instruction to the whole team has been to hold Capita to account absolutely with every possible commercial lever that is under this contract. And I think that's exactly what the team has been doing. And I think you're absolutely right, Catherine, to raise the issue. And where there are breaches like this, our very firm approach is always be robust.
So just to be clear, we are withholding and deducting monies each month for failed KPIs.
I guess there's two aspects to this. One is, yes, the financial implications of all of this that should be on Capita rather than the taxpayer, and should be substantial enough to create the change we need to see. But there's also the outstanding question for families who are grieving this week and still dealing with this. Do you have a target that you're working towards to at least deal with these most urgent and sensitive cases? Is there light at the end of the tunnel for these families?
So again, we will be getting a really firm commitment from Capita as part of the rectification plan, which we will receive next week. They are driving through these cases, but there is, for the volumes that are outstanding, we're still talking about well through July and into August before actually we're going to see a material reduction in these numbers.
Can I just say that's really disappointing?
It is, I agree with you.
Because these families, the family I'm talking about, and it's just one, I have many cases in my constituency, but they've been trying to get answers since January, but also we as a committee have been trying to get answers for months. Why did it have to wait to the point of known and demonstrable contractual failure, the date, before this work was being done to rectify? Why has this not been done sooner?
So first of all, on that, I deployed the team, I think it was on January the 13th. So the work that Angela and her team have been doing, both in terms of the surge resource of over 140 officials, but also the Pensions Recovery Task Force. I think we did that within a matter of days, so we did that really, really quickly. But I think the larger point you're pointing to, which is a very fair one, is that we have at the moment Capita talking about a working assumption of dealing with these cases this month and next month. But I think the committee could be forgiven, and we could all be forgiven, to chair your earlier point. We've had promises like this before. I had promises before the go-live date, which we might come to in a moment or two. So it is also about, for me, that's why I think the independent audits are so important, to be having the underlying structures there as well. For exactly the point, Catherine, that is being made, which is that, of course, we look at data, we look at which direction the data is going, but every single item of data, we are talking about a person and a family who deserve much better.
Yeah. Okay, Catherine, you done? Thank you very much. Clive, please.
Right, am I... Sorry.
No.
5.
Not Anna.
No.
No, 5 is Rachel Gilmore.
Rachel.
Rachel, then.
Thank you, Chair.
It's re-dedicated to you.
I cannot emphasise enough how appalling this situation is for our constituents across the country. And when Capita were before us in March, I'm afraid to say we had absolutely no inclination from them that they were prepared to be accountable, and they actually understood the enormity that their failures were having upon people. So, given that, what penalties do you plan to levy on Capita for its failure to deliver to required standards?
Well, I think again, very fair question. First of all, we've already withheld £9.9 million worth of milestone payments from Capita. That's the first point. Secondly, they've obviously defaulted in recent weeks at the end of June, and we're taking appropriate action. Of course, under this contract, there's, as you would expect, stages of escalation. There's step-in, etc., that you can go to. There are, and my instructions to the team, which they've been carrying out to the letter in recent months, is if there are further financial penalties going to be levied, they will continue to be. There is then, I think, a wider question here about this scheme, because for me at the moment there are two things. There's first of all the immediate duty we have to the 1.7 million members of this scheme in terms of stabilising this immediate crisis. And obviously that has to be dealt with. That's what's in the interest of the scheme members that I think are always at the forefront of my mind. There's then a second question about the future of this scheme becoming durable. And I do observe, I've only been the Minister since last September, but I do observe in the past a variety of iterations have been tried on this scheme to get it to be effective. What I've said to the team is I want the team to come back to me with options as to how we can put this onto a stable footing. And as I said to the House as well on Monday, the government has now introduced the public interest test, which is that you don't have outsourcing by default. Now, from April next year, the government will be looking at contracts worth over, I think, a value of £1 million as to when they come to an end, what might be the best way to take those contracts forward. So I think, Rachel, in answer to your question, I think the first point is we will continue, and my very firm instructions are to continue to use the commercial levers that we have under this contract. But I do think there is a second question here that has to be answered. How are we going to make this stable and durable for the long term?
So, Minister, you talk about the future and making this sustainable. I mean, one of the things that's being talked about and would make lives a little easier, and you've heard some of the really harrowing cases from my colleagues, is a compensation scheme for those that really suffered hardship. And it's felt by the unions and others that the sort of currently proposed £2,000 that the Ombudsman would award is not adequate in some cases. Can you tell us anything about that?
Let me just come to that, because it's something we have been discussing. Yes, so I think first of all, we, in terms of support and redress, as I say, first of all, there is the question of restoring the scheme. There's then the issue of redress, which I think falls into a number of categories. We've already agreed in terms of interest that this is automatically due when full benefits are settled more than a month after the member retires. So where you've got that gap, which is obviously no fault of the scheme member, there's interest. There's also then the issue of financial loss, where members can evidence a delay that caused financial loss. There's also the issue of distress and inconvenience. But so, to be clear, interest, there's an existing statutory complaints process that exists that can evaluate claims for financial losses. So that's done on a case-by-case basis. That is the situation at the moment. As I say, there's then that provision on interest to which I've just referred to. There are complaints, and where complaints have been raised, there's again an established process, first passing through Capita, Cabinet Office, and ultimately to the Pensions Ombudsman. So my answer to your question is I think there are 3 types of redress that members may be entitled to, and I think it's very important to set those out. And there's an existing process that will obviously look at that on a case-by-case basis. And I, as I'm sure the committee can imagine, will be very concerned to see how this is operating in the next days, weeks and months.
Can you give us an assurance that these cases will be dealt with quickly and sympathetically? I mean, the stage 1 and stage 2 process within the Cabinet Office can take a year, Pensions Ombudsman much longer than that. I think the least we could do for these people is if they do qualify for those 3 levels of compensation, they will be dealt with quickly.
Yeah. So if I might, let me explain what we're going to do, because you're absolutely right. What we can't have is people have then got to spend several years battling to get all the way through to the Ombudsman and then go through that process. And I regularly speak with both the regulator and the Ombudsman, and so we are doubling the size of the capacity in the Cabinet Office to make sure that the Cabinet Office step can go much faster and can cope with an increased volume. But also we're working with the Ombudsman to look at obviously these cases are typically case by case, but there are themes of these cases. So rather than wait that the only point that somebody could get a level of redress is to go all the way through the Ombudsman, if we know that the Ombudsman would make a certain award for a case like that, then let's make that award right at the very beginning, not wait for the member to have to go all the way through all of those many steps. So our aim is to be able to redress for all the awful experiences that people have had as far early in the process as we possibly can, with as few cases as we can manage having to wait to get all the way as far as the Ombudsman. And the Ombudsman is working very hard with us to make sure that we are living within the kind of judgments he would make, the kind of levels of redress he would have the power to instruct us to make, so that actually everything is happening early and not late.
Charlotte,
Thank you, Chair. I have to declare some interest before I ask my question. I am a member of the pension scheme. I'm a member of the Civil Service Pensioners Association, and I'm a retired member of the FDA. On the compensation issue, one thing, it's a small thing, but you could do it straight away, I suggest. The constituents who've come to me, I've noticed that when they finally get their payment resolved, they are told that there will be a few days delay in the payment because it goes through BACS. Why don't you require, where they're paying somebody later than they should be, that they at least pay them by CHAPS so they get that money straight away?
It's a perfectly good question, and I will raise it with Capita.
Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah.
Right, we now move to Sarah Green, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to follow up on Rachel's question, if I may, with the Permanent Secretary. So we know that 9.9 million has so far been withheld in terms of scheduled payments. Are you anticipating withholding further scheduled payments? You've just put on the record that out of 21 KPIs, you're anticipating 16 failing this month.
Yes. So as Andrew said, every single month we are still withholding further payments, and for every single one of those KPIs there is what we call a service credit, where we withhold money and deduct it from the payments that are made to Capita. I think we are going to be doing that for the foreseeable future.
So are there milestones that they will or can meet that will result in them receiving any of those payments?
Until they are delivering against the core service KPIs, and that is the 21 KPIs and the 59 subsidiary KPIs, ultimately we will be continuing to withhold money.
They are meeting some of the service levels, so they are delivering on the basic core payroll elements.
What are the 4 or 5 that they are?
Yeah, it's as Andrew said, it's mainly the delivery of the payroll. So we run around 200 payment schedules every single month through the scheme, and they are largely meeting the ongoing payroll KPIs.
I'm not sure that is basic, but let's go with basic. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. Rachel, please.
Question 7.
Yeah.
this is a pretty straightforward question, and I'm expecting a very straightforward answer, Minister. Under what circumstances would you terminate your contract with Capita?
So it would obviously be in circumstances where it was appropriate to do so in a contractual sense. I think you have to remember that I inherited here a long-term contract with a break clause that is in the second half of the contract. The way I see this is that there are escalatory steps. So there are steps that we are legally able to take. One of them is something that is called there's a notice of this default, which they're already in. That's why we're deploying the remedial advisor as part of that, together with the independent auditors. There's then escalatory steps where you can do things like formal step-ins within the contract. So there's a series of steps you can take within the contract. So, we obviously act on a very lawful basis, and that's what we will continue to do. That's the appropriate thing to do. And I should also say as well, and I understand completely the frustration of members, it would be totally irresponsible to just kind of walk away when you have a payroll. We've got a payroll here of 780,000 people. I have to be conscious of both the operational day-to-day and gripping the short term, whilst also, which is why I've asked officials to come back to me with options, looking at the longer term as well.
So the contract that you've currently got with Capita, does it define a level of service at which it can be terminated? Because from what you're saying, it seems that you're prepared to be on this treadmill of failure ad nauseam.
Well, I'll come to the commercials in a moment, but let me just say I am certainly not prepared to be on it ad nauseum, and certainly not do that. But do you want to just explain that?
Yeah, I think the Minister set out that so the contract there is a path, there is a contractual path to termination against continued failure of the key service KPIs. And as the Minister has explained, we are walking through the various interventions that the contract allows. Withholding money, service credits, and now we are appointing advisors and auditors. So we are walking through how the contract deals with failed performance. If that continued, the contract does allow for a termination, but obviously there's the question of, is that the right thing for the members?
So to what extent have any of the issues so far constituted a critical performance failure? Have we got there yet?
Well, ultimately, the fact that we have put them in default of the contract is us saying this is now 6 months of serious performance failure against the contract expectations. We are formally putting you into default, and we are very quickly walking through the assurance steps that we've outlined. Ultimately, we can walk away from this contract, but we can't do that unless we have got confidence we have an alternative that could operationally sustain the important service that we provide to the 1.7 million members of this scheme.
I presume from what you're saying that you must have looked into an alternative. You wouldn't just be keeping on going without having at some point thought of what an alternative would look like. That would just be insane.
Yeah, and rest assured that is not our mode of thinking. And that's why I've asked officials now rapidly to come back with what are the alternative options, because you're absolutely right. We have an ongoing responsibility for this scheme to keep functioning. That's why you can't just throw your hands up, walk away, because you need this scheme to be running, to deliver, particularly for the, obviously I think it's 780,000 people who are being paid on a regular basis by it.
Thank you, Rachel. I mean, just in a second. Minister, maybe Kat would answer this question. Short of terminating the contract, there are other things you could do. And I'm very conscious that you've now not even started on MacLeod remedy cases, which will bring in a whole new spectrum of work. Are you contemplating taking that out of Capita's orbit because they can't even perform their present duties, let alone this huge amount of extra work?
Yes, so you're absolutely right, Chair. There are a range of other things that we can do to simplify and to look at the scope of the services that are provided by Capita. The MacLeod remedy is a very complex piece of work that must be completed by the end of March next year. It is vital that we step up the service. So absolutely, that is one thing that we could look at in order to deliver the things that are most urgent.
Is that included in the current contract?
It's a separate contract because the MacLeod remedy process is such a bespoke service, it is not an ongoing part of the contract. We expect for the job to be done and ultimately for the quotes to be issued by the end of March next year. So it's a separate contract with Capita.
With that deadline, I can't see there's any confidence that Capita would be able to complete that work in the time.
There is an ongoing conversation with Capita.
Fair enough. Catherine, then Lauren, please.
Could I just follow up on a couple of those points? What would be the consequences of failing to process the MacLeod contractual changes in time?
I'll have to ask Andrew about the commercial consequences, but clearly we are under a legal obligation, most importantly.
Yeah, I don't mean commercially, I mean legally.
Legally we have an obligation, and all defined benefit pension schemes run by the state, so teachers, armed forces, judicial, to ensure that the administrators provide those quotes by the end of March next year. So it's statutory as well as commercial.
I'm just anticipating our next inquiry and report in advance, which brings me to the question. I cannot get my head around why we are waiting another period to look at options for what should now happen when the writing was on the wall for this outcome 6 months ago, if not sooner. So can you explain why why we're still waiting for even the options of what we might do about what has happened here? And also just some clarity. So in 2025, the National Audit Office report found the Cabinet Office had withheld £9.6 million in payments for missed milestones during the transition period. Could you clarify, is that included in the 9.9? So subsequent to the transition period, there's just been a 0.3 of £1 million withheld, or and how does that indicate what will be held in future for what are ongoing contractual breaches?
So I'll pass on in terms of the precise numbers, Catherine. But let me just look. I did very carefully consider the National Audit Office report from 2025. But let me just pick up what you've said, because I think it's fair to set this out. So I felt, obviously, when I got to November, December of last year, that I had very limited options in this space. There was already in place the contract with Capita from November 2023, which obviously predates Kat and I in the Cabinet Office. That was in place. There'd obviously been then the 2-year transition. It just wasn't viable to continue with my CSP. I mean, there was no legal basis to do so, let alone anything else. But even if you moved beyond that, there was such significant problems in that scheme. There was no union recognition. There was ongoing industrial disputes. And indeed, I think that point about staff coming over was something that was raised by, I think, the Public Accounts Committee itself around about that time. It was more expensive to stay with my CSP, even if it were possible. There was also the issue that they weren't even willing to commit to proper KPIs. They were talking about using best endeavour. So there was no, to have continued on that was just not a viable option. The idea that, I could insource something in December in those circumstances with no state architecture to do it, and this pre-existing contract, I think, is just for the birds, frankly. I mean, we're talking about a 1.7 million member scheme. I mean, that just wasn't in any sense a realistic proposition. So what I was left with was the transition to Capita, and the way that that contract gave stronger commercial levers, there's no doubt about that, than the situation with my CSP, which obviously I've been instructing the team to use it at every opportunity. But what I was also looking at then were contingencies, okay? But I was looking at what are we going to do here if things don't work out. Now, First of all, I went to Capita, first of all. I'm quite old-fashioned. I like to speak directly to people to actually try to get a sense of what they were talking about. And I feel personally very let down about this. I mean, I met the chief executive. I know you'll be meeting the chief executive, I think, after this meeting. And I was obviously talking about their preparedness for this contract, what the contingencies were. And I was being told then by the chief executive...
When was this?
This is the 25th of November last year. So this is before the go-live date on the 1st of December. That the UK government would be presiding over the largest AI-enabled pension in the UK, and I would therefore have, and I quote, a flagship use case, is the assurance I was being given by Capita ahead of this. And I'm sure as the committee can imagine, we were obviously aware there was a backlog. We were obviously aware, as were Capita, that there were significant problems with my CSP. But I was very specific and questioning of the chief executive throughout that meeting. But I also was reassuring myself that if things did go wrong, government does have surge resources. That was the other point, that we always do have that. And as soon as it became clear, and we're talking about early January, so it wasn't very long afterwards, that we were going to have to ramp up, that's exactly what I did. So that's the situation, if you like, I found myself in. No, I believe that we've done all we can over recent months. I believe the officials, for the very robust, I think they'll all agree, very robust instructions I've been giving, they've all been carrying that out to the letter. But I am certainly not coming before you with some sort of counsel of perfection here. We should not be in this situation. There's no question about that. And that's why, as well, we have to collectively learn the lessons of this, not just the last 6-7 months, but also, let's not forget, the trouble my CSP had already significantly got into as well. And what is the best way to run this going forward? And I think that's what I'll certainly be turning my mind to, but as I say, my immediate priority is stabilising this service. And the very people, Catherine, you were talking about and your constituents, and when, I think you asked me the question in the chamber as well about the person, obviously, who very sadly passed away, we need to be dealing, as Andrew is, with that as a matter of urgency. We've also then got to get it right going forward as well.
And just to clarify on the 9.6 and the 9.9...
So the 9.9 million is the updated amount. So that's the total amount that's been withheld from Capita for failing the transition. In addition to that, we have been deducting monies every single month for failed service delivery. We haven't declared those numbers because we are in dispute with Capita about the numbers each month because of some lack of agreement on some of the data, which is why we've brought in the independent auditor. So we are doing a reconciliation which will clarify those deductions to date, which I then will then be able to declare that and update members.
Minister, you heard what I said about MacLeod and you heard what Catherine said about MacLeod. Anybody who has had anything to do with pension schemes knows the huge amount of work involved in MacLeod. Can you give us an undertaking you are going to urgently consider this matter? Because otherwise I can see those statutory deadlines not being met. Yeah.
It's certainly an urgent issue for me. It's discussions I've been having with the Permanent Secretaries. There are ongoing discussions at the moment with Capita, so I'm sure the committee will appreciate I'm being quite guarded in what I'm saying, but you can rest assured, number one, I am very conscious of the statutory deadline. Secondly, I am very conscious of the scale and complexity of implementing the MacLeod judgment across these different defined benefit schemes. And thirdly, I regard it as a top priority.
Thank you.
Chair, would you mind can I just add to that? So, yes. As you know better than anybody, the MacLeod remedy affects a number of pension schemes. This is a major, major challenge for all of us, and we are doing a lot of work across those schemes to learn the lessons and to make sure that we're operating as an administrators group across the public sector. I think that's really, really important. But secondly, I should just correct for the record, I said it was a separate contract. The term is it's a separate statement of works. Just to make sure that for your record and for the House, that is the terminology.
If you took it out of the as it's part of the existing contract, you would then expect to reduce the total value of the contract.
Yes, so there is a separate amount of money specifically for McLeod, but it is part of the commercial umbrella arrangements. So when we're doing the negotiations, this will all be part of the package, but there is a very separate statement of works that sets out the performance specifically for McLeod.
That's very clear. Thank you, Kat. Simon, please.
Thank you, Chair. The nub of the conundrum, Minister, surely is this, that there isn't the competitive marketplace of bidders in this, and indeed in many other sectors where government has outsourced. It's been concentrated into sometimes monopoly bidders at worst, and sometimes just one or two. So the issue you're surely, between all of you, wrestling with is this. If the outcomes deteriorate, inexorably that moves you towards taking a decision to terminate the contract. And there is nobody else outside to whom you could award it, so it would have to be insourced. In those circumstances, it's going to take you, about, I think you said in the chamber, about 2 years, I think, something of that nature, to get up and running. Capita would have said, right, well, we've lost this, there's no incentive. The situation would have got worse to have taken you to the decision of, we just have to terminate the contract because the threshold has been met. And what is today a bad situation then suddenly looks 10 times worse. So isn't the issue here, the stark issue, is that in essence a company like Capita has the private parts of HMG very firmly in their grip. And what is the strategy to remind Capita that the government is their number one client if it wishes to continue to secure business from the government? It needs to up its game. But if they're facing into there is an inevitability because psychologically we've gone past the tipping point of contract retention, a bad situation will just get worse, and the people who will suffer will be all of our constituents.
Well, I think you summarise, broadly speaking, the policy dilemmas that sit here. It's why there are no easy answers. It's why the idea that anybody sensible could just walk away from one of these contracts is clearly not a viable option. And you're right as well to highlight some of the incentive structures that exist here. But I would just gently, I think your question hinted towards it, highlight, and you can put this to Capita, I'm sure, when they arrive in due course, but they rely heavily on the government as a customer. This is one, it's a huge contract, huge undertaking, but there are many other contracts across both, not just central government, but amongst other public sector bodies. I think there's over 80 contracts that exist. So I think that whilst, as the committee would expect me, the Joint Committee would expect me to say, I of course make decisions on individual performance as you would expect me to do, rationally, on performance under contracts and legal obligations that exist, but more broadly as well, the Cabinet Office is responsible for the broader relationship with Capita, and I think that's something Capita should not forget.
Yeah. If I might add just 2 things. I mean, one, my direct conversations with the chairman of the board and with the chief executive have been entirely focused around the fact that we are their number one customer, and we expect to be treated as such. And that is important framing for the whole of this negotiation and getting this contract back on track, thing one. I think the second thing I'd say, you're absolutely right to point to the state of the market for these large pension schemes. When we tendered for this contract, there were only 2 suppliers left at the time at which the contract was awarded back in 2023. And government and the public sector is now one of the last standing parts of the economy that offer defined benefit pension schemes. So we are a very, very large customer for complex schemes with a market that has a very small number of suppliers. And that, therefore, is the market challenge that we are facing. And in normal circumstances, you might say, well, why wouldn't you shape the market? You're such a big customer. Surely you can stimulate interest and competition in providing more of these services. Because these are high-risk, complex, difficult to administer services, we're really struggling to see where a competitive market can be delivered. So in a very classic kind of make or buy decision-making process, we are having to go right back to the basics of the different models, and it's not as simple as insourcing or outsourcing. There are many different models for how you deal with this sort of market situation.
Can I just add one more comment on your point about who's got the leverage?
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with a lot of what you said, but I would just point out that the way that we are now exercising the contract and the amount of additional investment that Capita are having to put into this service, and I'm sure they'll talk to you about that later, it's very, very likely that they will be losing money on this contract. So, that's how the contract is kind of working.
Is that the point where we get out our little tiny violins and play a tune, or for Capita? No.
Right, Lauren, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everybody for coming today. We've talked a little bit about the surge team's work. I think the figure was around about 140 people who've been deployed by the Cabinet Office or the government to really address the failure of Capita's performance and inability to administer the pension scheme to the standards I think we and our constituents would certainly expect. How much has that cost to date?
Yeah. So the surge team is not the only investment. So there is about 140 surge. And then when you look at the additional, overall there's about another 40 people, which is people like me, people doing MI, people running things like MP surgeries. There's a variety of other colleagues. And we expect the costs to the end of 26-27 to be £12.5 million.
Okay. And £12.5 million, are you then expecting, so that's the end of the financial year, so that goes until April 2027. Is that a final, when you're expecting everything to be sorted and people can go back to doing their day jobs, or are you expecting there may be additional ongoing resources that are needed?
Yeah, so the decision about whether or not we're at the point when we should pull back the support for government is totally predicated on a complete focus on when we are content that the members are getting the service that they need to have delivered. So we will continue to be there under the instruction of the Minister until we're in a situation where we're not there. So I'm forecasting costs, but the costs will be what the costs need to be, and through all of the commercial activity, we're absolutely determined that none of that will be to the cost of the taxpayer.
Can I just come on to two points, if I may, there? Because the first point is this. I am not prepared to withdraw this team unless I am absolutely satisfied that you have a scheme that is then able to run to the standard we expect. So I've no intention of doing that, and that's why I think we are in the position we are with the presence of the team. The second point is, let me be clear with the committee, I intend to recover every penny piece of that cost, or whatever the cost is, from Capita, because it is the taxpayer having to step in, frankly, to deal with their failure.
We all agree it's completely unacceptable that has to happen. When are you going to be able to recover that £12.5 million from Capita, though? Is that being given in stages? Is it at the end of the financial year? When will you see that costs given back to the government?
So we haven't done that negotiation yet. So it's part of the reconciliation that we're doing, that we've talked about with this new independent auditor. As part of that, we're doing a real drains-up audit of all of the costs that the Minister's talked about. And as part of that, we'll agree the payment schedule back to government.
So, Angela, do those figures, the 12.5 million, go right back to the beginning, to the 2nd of February?
Yeah, the entire lot, everything we've invested so far.
And, Minister, that is what you will recover, right back to the 2nd of February, because Capita so far, I think, have only undertaken to pay you up from May, I believe.
Yeah, that's completely unacceptable, just to be clear. And, I mean, that figure is predicated on a particular timeline, so let there be no doubt, it is the entirety of the cost, whatever the timeline ends up being, that I am determined to get back from Capita. And I do not regard it as a serious proposition that they are only suggesting we go back to a certain moment in time. because they are the reason we've had to send the surge team in.
Thank you.
I've got a final question, if I may. We've heard that despite the surge team, despite all of the extra resources that the government has had to give Capita so that they can attempt to improve their service, we still have cases where escalation mechanisms aren't working. We still have a growing backlog. What consideration have you given to, especially considering that Capita, you're expecting to recoup the money from Capita, to increasing that number of surge team so that we can get it sorted sooner?
So two things, just to pick up on the surge team. Look, I will always take operational advice on that. If a proposition is put to me that I need to do something additional, then I'm most certainly open to that. I have regular dialogue with Angela, regular updates. And by the way, Chair, I do echo what you've said about the work that her team has done. It's been Herculean, frankly, in the circumstance of recent months. Can I just make a second point, though, because on the escalation mechanisms, whether it's individuals raising cases or indeed members of Parliament raising cases, this is something I've found particularly, frankly, offensive from Capita in terms of particular. And again, we've had to, in effect, take over not just MP surgeries, because, frankly, Chair, there was one Capita tried to run. I had such negative feedback from members of Parliament, we basically had to take that over. I ran a drop-in personally with Angela back in April. I know that officials are running now weekly virtual surgeries, and they have been doing for MPs and casework since the 29th of May. But also be in no doubt of the emphasis I have placed directly to Capita's Chief Executive now on more than one occasion about dealing with members of Parliament who are speaking on behalf of their constituents. And indeed, my colleague in the Cabinet Office, Minister Carr, has actually been in contact with the Speaker of the House of Commons about this, so seriously we take their failure to respond to MP correspondence in a timely manner.
That's helpful to know, but getting back to the surge capabilities, do you have capability within your current headcount in the Cabinet Office or elsewhere to increase that number of 140 people?
We could, but I'll rely on Angela's operational expertise. There's a saturation point, and I come back to, if the technology doesn't work, if the data's not there, you can put many, many more people into this process and still hit a brick wall. So I think operationally, we're taking Angela's advice on, if she thinks that more surge resource is needed, then we will absolutely put it into the task force.
Yeah, I think the key thing to remember is that this is a really complex pension scheme. It's not a thing where you just throw another 50 people at it and the following week something magical will happen. These are this scheme, the inherited colleagues who beg your pardon, the inherited people who have moved over from my CSV. See, I can't help myself. That, many of those people have got many years of deep defined benefits pensions expertise, and therefore where the civil service surge people are doing, we are being massively careful to deploy them only to places where their level of skill and expertise means that they can do a good job. So that means there is only so much of the scheme where we can make a real difference, because what you really need is deep pensions expertise. So we are aiming to do all the jobs where a Capita colleague could be anybody, leaving the Capita people to be able to drive down and focus on the really deep pension stuff. But it is the conversation about, could you have more people, what could we do, is a conversation that I have regularly with Capita. But I have to say, I think Kat's point is absolutely the important one. We will not people our way out of this. The technology delivery is the only way for a scheme of this scale and this complexity. It is only through the delivery of the technology will this scheme get to the point of good, high quality delivery.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Charlotte, please.
Thank you, Chair. My questions to the Minister, please. We've heard about how many people dependent on this scheme have been let down because the contract hasn't worked. We've heard that we're now 7 months into the live contract, asking for a detailed plan of how they're going to deliver the IT and bringing in specialists to review that. Given all of that, how do you feel, Minister, about how confident are you in the capability of the Cabinet Office to let and manage contracts?
Let me just take that in two senses, because I think there's two aspects to this. There's firstly the negotiation of contracts in the first place, which is distinct, obviously, from the management of contracts. That's the first point. This is obviously a contract that was inherited from November 2023. Secondly, obviously, there is then the question, which you quite rightly put to me, which is management through the contractual period for whatever it might be. Now, I'll turn to Cat in a moment, because there are things we've done in terms of our pensions team to add, more senior leadership to it. But I have to say, just speaking on a personal basis from my own ministerial experience, which admittedly is only since September of last year, but certainly in terms of the approach I have taken to this contract, and I hope you can all see it's been as robust as I can be within the contract that I have, I'm certainly satisfied that when I've given steers and instructions, they've been carried out to the letter. But I also know, and perhaps Kat can speak to this, we have been increasing our capacity in terms of management as well.
Yeah, I think there are lots of lessons learned about both the capability and the capacity of contract management. And some of these we've talked about previously in earlier sessions. We completely changed the basis of the contract based on lessons learned from the MyCSP contract. So the levers, the commercial tools, the milestones, the KPIs, the way in which the contract was managed under MyCSP was a lot weaker than what we have under this Capita contract, which is why from day one, and in fact minus 6 months from day one, we've been able to withhold money. So before they were even allowed to transition to deliver this service, we withheld funds, we were able to leverage our commercial position in the way in which the service was delivered. We have boosted both the capability and the capacity of the Cabinet Office team. I think one of the reflections I humbly have is that we assumed that we would be able to manage this contract with a similar level of capacity and leadership that we had under the MyCSP contract. Very, very quickly that became clear that wasn't acceptable. And that's why Andrew, as our Government Chief Commercial Officer, has personally invested a significant amount of time. It's why we've invested in a much bigger contract management team with different capability and different expertise to ensure that we are holding them to account every single day. Andrew might want to say a little bit more about the strengthening of capability and capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Kat says, we would reflect on that. We didn't have a strong enough team from day one. I think we accept that. So we've really focused on, we've doubled the size of the team. We have a cross-government contract management capability program, which is a really intensive kind of upskilling course, and we've made sure that the key contract managers have either gone through that recently or are going through that accreditation. We've brought in a commercial director to oversee that team as well. So there's some real strength in it over the last 3 months, but I think we accept probably we should have had more of that before transition. I think that was one of the key lessons for us to learn.
And you've talked a lot about the complexity of a defined benefit scheme and how there aren't many suppliers out there who can do that. This is a very unusual defined benefit scheme because it's not funded. And it's surely the funding, how you do the investments, how you manage them, how you do the actuarial assessments of whether you've got sufficient investment to deliver the benefit. That's the complicated bit. Actually, this scheme is not particularly complicated. You've talked about how Capita are hitting their targets on the payroll side of it. The payroll side of it is payroll. There's lots of people who do payroll. You don't need to be a defined benefit pension specialist to do the payroll. In order to work out the calculations, again, they're fairly straightforward. It's how long has the person worked? When did they start working? Have they had maternity leave? Did they go part-time? They're questions that you have to find the answers to, but they're not complicated. They're not specialist. They're fairly basic HR questions. You could set up some pretty good spreadsheets quite quickly that would have protection on them so you couldn't over-edit the formulae and things to calculate this. To be frank with you, I've had to do it myself on a much smaller scale, but it's not difficult to do. And I wonder if you've got yourself over concerned that there's only this one supplier when actually there's plenty of competent people who could deliver those services?
So look, I think there's a few different points there. I mean, clearly there's an issue of volume, scale, security. Obviously, with something of this size, there's no doubt about that. Though what you've just described is, of course, one of the reasons why a technological solution. Why I was given, and I've already read to the committee the assurance I was given about this, but because the scheme is in the nature you described, that's one of the reasons why technology would obviously be so helpful in terms of delivering it. The wider point you're making, though, which is essentially around, well, should you look at different aspects for different suppliers? You'd made the point there about payroll. Well, look, these are the kind of things more broadly that, I've asked officials to look at and to come back to me on, because you're right, it's got payroll in it, but it's got other aspects as well, as we've been discussing. But these are the kind of things that obviously we need to look at now, and I think officials will come back to me about.
Absolutely. I think the one thing I would add is some of the complexity not just comes from scale, but the fact that the civil service has many, many different configurations over time. So we're 120 employers with different machinery of government changes, with multiple pension changes in recent times. So you'll be familiar with some of the moves and the changes to the scheme within the civil service pension scheme. One of the really basic problems we have is making sure that we have continuous service data, and because there are so many different HR and data collection systems across government, across 120 employers, getting accurate data quickly, efficiently is one of the big challenges to the complexity of this scheme. And that's why shared services, us moving on to a single enterprise technology platform so that the civil service can manage its people more effectively and their data, is so intrinsic to what we're doing here.
So is the civil service struggling to provide Capita with the data it needs in a timely manner?
No, it's just the cleaning up of the data. So all of the data is with Capita. There's no doubt that they will go back and check information, particularly with some of the more complex cases. And because different bits of information have come from different sources in the data transfer from my CSP to Capita, there are complexities there. They have got the data, it's just not the cleanest high quality data that you would need to run this as efficiently as you would like.
Could I just come back on your comment about choice in the market? It wasn't our experience through the procurement. So it was a very long, lengthy procurement process. I think we started with 6 providers after a very extensive market kind of exercise. When the complexity of the requirement and the scale and some of the elements of it were really worked through in detail, that quickly dropped to 3, that then dropped to 2. We only got 2 credible final bids, which was Capita and the other was my CSP. So that wasn't our experience working with the market.
Thank you.
All right. Kat, you and Andrew have been quite candid about the Cabinet Office role in all of this. But we, the PAC, produced a report in October, so we didn't think that the scheme was anything like ready for Capita to take over. Therefore, it was a surprise to me when you went live on the 1st of December. And you had all the data from both sides. So you should have been able to at least alert Capita to the size of the task that they were taking on. Now, I know they're not angels in all of this, but I had a letter from my CSP in response to a letter from me dated the 2nd of April 2026, where they say, amongst other things, we do not believe these activities, so this is the transfer activities, were carried out to the level of detail and thoroughness required for such a major transition. As a result, the risks associated with not having a robust transition cutover process in place were not fully understood or mitigated prior to transition. What do you actually say? What is your response to that?
So I think Andrew will want to add to this, but we obviously dispute quite a lot of what they say in that letter. There was very robust processes and milestones as part of the transition. We took a lot of time and effort to pay attention to your work. And I, as you know, Sir Geoffrey, I wrote to you on a very regular basis to give you an update on our considerations of your recommendations. I would go back to what the Minister described, which was when faced with the choice of proceeding or not, I'm absolutely certain we would have ended up in a similar position with the civil service having to either support a continuing out of contract increasing backlog scheme under my CSP, or we would be where we are today. The two routes would have ended in some sort of complex failure. I'm pretty confident of that.
Okay.
And you might want to add some of the commercial and transitional arrangements.
Well, okay, just to clarify, we were in a commercial and contractual dispute with my CSP towards the end of the contract there, so we did not agree on some of the service delivery and how that applied to the contract at that time, so it's not a surprise that they disagreed with some of our decisions. It was a very difficult relationship at that point.
All right, thank you for those replies. Clive Betts, please.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, you referred to the fact you only took a post in September.
Yeah.
January you started to implement response to the failures, including the search team. But already the National Audit Office had highlighted failures in the whole process. Now you are looking at a much more systematic and detailed assessment of what's going wrong and what's needed to put right. Why didn't you begin that particular process either at the end of last year? I appreciate you couldn't take the contract away. Why not start to look at the alternatives and the extra monitoring then, or at least in January?
Yeah, so the first point is I did look very carefully at the National Audit Office report, though I have to say, I mean, I was looking through it in preparation for coming before you today, and with the exception, ironically, of implementing the MacLeod judgment, the National Audit Office was saying that since August 2017, my CSP has met expected performance, as talk about where it had met performance measures, saying where it had been below expected measures, but actually was not saying don't transition to Capita. What it was actually talking about was, various lessons to be learned. So I certainly did look at that. I actually looked at what the Public Accounts Committee had said, and as I indicated in my answer a moment or two ago, I felt that of this attempting on no legal basis to continue with a failing scheme versus the go live on the 1st of December, I don't regret doing that, because I think that was the best thing I could do in the circumstances. Now, the question, Clive, you're putting to me around planning, well, the government was elected anyway on a wave of insourcing is what we were elected on. There has been parallel work going on that. That's been done by the Parliamentary Secretary of the Cabinet Office, Minister Ward, who has been driving forward the work that's got us to the public interest test. If you then challenge me to say, well, of course I was in January thinking already about how am I going to get through this in the medium term, my absolute priority then was stabilising the service. That's what I put the resource into, and that's what I've been doing. So the work going forward to look strategically at all government contracts was going on last autumn. And I think both the go live decision in the circumstance I was in, but also I don't think anyone can say I haven't intervened very quickly, very sharply. And also, by the way, looking at all eventualities, I've also been very clear with officials, and Andrew can comment on this, as to using every possible lever we've got under the contract as well. So I would suggest I've been doing those two things in parallel.
I'm not saying you haven't been doing things. I'm not even saying that you could have stopped the contract going ahead. What I'm saying is, do you think in hindsight it might have been better to start the process you've now commenced back in January?
I don't, because I think that what I was left with was a situation where I was moving to a different provider. I think what I had to do was to prioritise the immediate continuation of service. And I think to do that, I had to absolutely focus on the levers I had available to deliver. Now, we did know about the backlog. We obviously knew that was going to have to be dealt with. But my absolute focus, of course I was also considering the longer term, but I think I was right to focus on that stabilisation. And at this stage now, to be pushing forward with the work we have. So I think I've acted in a timely way throughout, but that isn't to say, let me just say to the committee, as I said earlier, I'd never come with a counsel of perfection, and that is always why we will look broadly at the lessons learned at both political and official level, and I'm sure we'll take them very seriously.
Following, in the meantime, though, you had eventually decided to not go ahead with the Royal Mail pension scheme, but not to act on Capita. What was the difference in those two decisions?
So there are differences here, and I think again that is a fair challenge. I think on that one, there's a number of factors I'll come back to in a minute, but the principal thing in my mind was there was no operational risk on that one. There was no operational risk day to day to the scheme members of the decision that I took on that. So it wasn't, in contrast, if you look at this one, if I tried to walk away in December, I think you'd be talking about, frankly, something catastrophic in terms of hundreds of thousands of pensioners not getting their payment. So that risk wasn't there in terms of the Royal Mail pension service. But I've no regrets whatsoever about my decision on that Royal Mail contract. They'd failed virtually every milestone. So I didn't have any confidence in delivery. But I would say I'm always conscious both of the contractual position, what I want to do within the law, but secondly, as I say, I have to make sure that the scheme, whether it's the Royal Mail pension scheme, there are many other pension schemes as well, is delivering day to day as well, and that was the big difference to me.
Right. In the meantime, last year you went ahead and gave Capita the shared services contract, even though things were beginning to go wrong with this contract.
So, just slightly point of fact, I didn't go ahead, and I think it's a DWP synergy.
Someone in government did.
Yeah, I'd take that. I'd take that. So on that, and again, I'll come to Kat in a moment, we certainly did, from the Cabinet Office, reflect across to DWP our experiences and lessons learnt, and I think that was reflected then in the approach they took.
Yeah, so I think thing one, this is a very different sort of contract. The shared services contract at DWP is for large volume transactional shared service activity. It is a much less risky service. But what we did is we shared at both official and political level all of our experience. And as part of those conversations, Andrew, as Chief Commercial Officer, met with both the political and official leadership at DWP and Capita, and changes were made to the shared services contract based on the experience that we have had. Andrew might want to add to that, but obviously that was a matter for the Minister at DWP.
So we went through a kind of lessons learnt of what had gone wrong with the transition here, and how that could be applied to the Synergy contract. That resulted in the department asking for additional assurances through that process, which they worked through. But ultimately, it was DWP's choice to do that against other choices they had.
Still government, and people do not understand, I think including MPs, that when firms fail to deliver, they still get awarded other contracts. You know, if at home my roof's leaking and somebody comes along and doesn't repair it properly, and then I have a leak on a pipe somewhere, I don't say, well, you haven't done that very well, but I'll give you this next job, even though it's a smaller job. I don't do it, and no one in the right mind would. So why does government not properly take account of past failures or continuing failures when awarding other contracts?
Yeah, so public procurement regulations have always been enshrined on individual contract by contract basis in order to uphold kind of fair and transparency for all bidders. We had changed that. So this contract was let under the previous procurement regulations, where taking in past performance was very, very difficult to do unless it was a kind of clear kind of criminal act. We've obviously brought in the Procurement Act in February of last year. That gives the government additional powers to take past performance into account.
And that's just general failings, is it? It's not just critical performance failure. It's anything less than that can still be taken into account, can it?
It's a concept of professional misconduct, which is at the heart of the new powers that we have, which has got a wide range of definitions.
No one's saying, the professional misconduct of some form. They're just saying it's a failure to deliver a service. Most lay people would think, well, surely that ought to be taken account of when looking at awarding a contract for another service.
So significant, sustained, poor performance will come under that criteria.
How's that defined?
Sorry?
Significant, sustained. Who defines that?
So it's set out in the regulation. So I guess what I'm trying to explain to you is the new powers that the government has to debar companies in the future is around the concept of professional misconduct. But it's right that the bar should be high, isn't it? Because to bar a company from any public sector contracts is a very, very significant thing to do.
I don't agree with you actually, but that's I think that the significant sustained failure, isn't that what's happening here on this contract? Would you accept that?
Ultimately, that's why we've put the organisation into breach of contract.
Is this a significant sustained failure?
There are different definitions, and what we're talking about here is the performance against this contract. It is ultimately a matter for our lawyers and our commercial experts to interpret and to manage that within the context they're operating within. And I know you will appreciate this, Deputy Chair, but some of the things that I would like to be able to say to you are obviously deeply commercially sensitive. And all I would say is that the powers that the government have are legally defined, they are commercially and legally managed with appropriate advice, and we will use every single option available to us as is necessary.
I think most lay people out there who we represent will be staggered if the government now gave another contract to Capita in this situation. Could you give us a guarantee that won't happen until this matter is resolved?
We cannot guarantee that because ultimately we have to comply with the law and we have to comply with the procurement regulations as stipulated in order to ensure transparent, fair procurement processes.
Well, can I suggest, Minister, with your officials as well across government, you might go away and look at this situation, because most of the people who pay their taxes for providing a decent service for the government would not expect the government to be paying those taxes out to a firm that's behaving this badly.
Yeah, I mean, look, 2 points. I mean, on the very narrow issue of the surge team, I appreciate that's not the point you're referring to. You're referring to more broadly, but certainly we will want every penny piece back. But to your broader point, and I'm sure the committee will understand why I'm treading quite carefully here, but be assured that every single commercial option that is available to us will be considered.
It's something we might want to pursue at some point. Chair.
Yes, thank you, Clive. I have a lot of sympathy with what you said, frankly, and I think you need to perhaps look at those procurement rules, Minister, really, perhaps. Peter, please.
Thank you. Just building on the point that's been set out there, is it recognised that potential exclusion from future government contracts might act as an incentive for companies to maintain their current contracts at a sufficiently high level?
Again, I'm treading carefully here, but I think your broad point, which is that do penalties, potentially severe penalties, in the event of poor performance drive good performance, you would sincerely hope that was the case?
I mean, for many years I was a local government leader, and I was told that I couldn't, for one reason or another, take legal action against people, or that regulations were too restrictive. And the moment I started forcing officers to start taking that action, I noticed a significant improvement in performance, and that we consistently won the cases. The reason, in my general opinion, and frankly, members of PACAC, most of us are former local government people who have not had a single good experience we could share about the company Capita, and found it astounding that they continue to receive any work whatsoever. But the moment I found that I ignored people and forced them to start going down that measure, we found we consistently won those particular cases. And I do wonder whether or not the public sector continues to receive poor performance from these contracts precisely because they know our regulations are inhibitive of us taking action any reasonably minded person would under those circumstances.
Well, look, it's you're reflecting, Peter, I think, very well on your own experience in local government there. There's a lot of expertise around the table. And be assured, Chair, that in recent months in my steers to officials, it's been precisely around looking at every lever we've got to drive performance, and where things are going wrong, that appropriate monies are being withheld, and that's exactly what we have been doing. I think that reflects a lot from what you've just saying, Peter, about your own experience.
Just my last question then. You know, for many, many years across the public sector, we've hidden behind EU procurement regulations being the barrier which prevented us from doing things which might other rationally be seen as being common sense approach to take. Given that government sets its own rules for how it procures these things and its own rules for how in which these contracts will be issued in future, are there learning points from this which result in you considering future changes to the law to better enable government to respond?
So first of all, we've obviously started making changes with the public interest test last month. And as I think I indicated in an answer a moment or two ago, we will be looking at, in April 2027, every contract worth over £1 million when it comes to an end as to what is the appropriate home for it. So yes, we will certainly be looking at this procurement regime, and that's the work that's already been going on and will continue. And you're right, we need the incentive structures that exist in the public sector are certainly things we need to look at.
Thank you.
Peter, thank you. Can we speed up, because the Minister's got a hard deadline and we're now over our time. So next question, Sam, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So Minister, in your statement earlier this week, you said that if you were able to bring this pension scheme in-house today, you would do so. We've talked about the barriers around immediate operational risk. We've talked about the IT system problems. Are there any other barriers to bringing it in-house? And then bearing all of those in mind, what sort of timeline would we be looking at from the point the decision was made?
So listen, what I've said there, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but look, this contract, and I've already said this on the record, I think when we do get past April 2027, seems to me to be a prime candidate for insourcing. But clearly, if you have something that is a 1.7 million member scheme, that is on a week, on a regular basis paying out money that 780,000 people are relying on, then that is clearly not a simple operation to take indoors. And you would need, obviously, technology, and that's something, as the committee has heard, I've been discussing with Capita, but also you need, in my view, a quite enormous state architecture to be able to cope with something of that size. And that's why I've asked officials to look at this range of options for me, and also to reflect, frankly, on the history of this scheme over recent decades, because this particular model, which is an outsourced model with a private company, other versions of this have been tried over the last 20 years with varying degrees of success. And I think it's important we look at all those things to make sure that I have realistic options going forward.
Sure. And as has been discussed, we've known about Capita's failures for a long time. The NAO and the PAC have been ringing alarm bells about key milestones being missed throughout 2025. The Cabinet Office is also aware, as we've discussed, that the market for this sort of service is very small. There were only 2 providers, you've told us, at the last pre-procurement. So given all of that, what preemptive preparation work has already been done to prepare for the possibility of bringing it in-house, given that for some time it seems it's been clear that that's going to be the direction at some point?
So there's two aspects to this, and this is how I've been doing this throughout. First of all, it's stabilising the scheme. Right? We need to have the kind of situations that members around this table are seeing their constituents in. We have to solve that. We have to solve the backlog and get it to the level that Angela is talking about, that one would ordinarily expect it to be in. Secondly, that work is going on now in terms of looking in the medium term at what is the best way going forward to run a scheme like this. So both those things are happening in parallel.
So in relation to the independent auditors that you're about to send in, will you commit to asking them to make a point of looking at how quickly and easily the pension holders' data could be extracted from Capita's systems and uploaded into a hypothetical new system that we then bring in under a future in-house model?
So that will be a piece of work that we will do, because the work looking at different options to make this a sustainable service is work that we are doing with experts coming to help us. We're pulling together a pool of experts to help us with those different options at the moment. The independent auditors are there to do a very, very specific job, which is to make sure that they are auditing the current service and giving us confidence the data, the technology, the processes, the operations are optimised to deliver the current service. So it's a similar group of expertise. It won't be the auditors, it will be people helping us to develop those options.
Fine. Will those people have sufficient access to Capita systems to make a reasonable assessment of how easy it would be to extract the data?
I think that's still up for discussion with Capita directly, but obviously we would need to be able to do that to understand the limitations and the constraints on doing this.
Fine. So then, a final commercial follow-up question in that case. What contractual options do you have to require Capita to make some modifications to their systems to make data extraction easier, essentially to avoid an outcome where they can hold us to ransom by virtue of saying, well, look, we've made it so every single person has to have a manual download of their data and upload somewhere else. How can you require them under the contract to simplify that and avoid that becoming a problem? We can have a answer in writing if needed, because I know that's quite technical.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely have full rights to access all of the data. There's no problem with accessing information and data.
It's the systems I'm talking about,
yeah,
rather than the
so
data itself.
I think we might need to reflect on that question and come back to you.
Thank you, Sam, very much. Clive, please.
Yes, about the loans that are paid out, and perhaps we could have a bit of information, but also perhaps, Minister, you could have a look at the people who aren't entitled to them. That's some really difficult cases by the Civil Service Pensions Alliance. I'm going to pass over the letter, including Caroline Wise, they mentioned Miriam Cartwright, Mickey King, in different circumstances. The problem is that some of them are waiting for widows' pensions, and of course they don't qualify because they're not actually an ex-employee. Then you get deferred pensioners, is Caroline Wise is. Again, she doesn't qualify for the loan. So Unite the Union raised with the Capita Fire and Rescue Service, which is outsourced from the Civil Service. So they are ex-civil servants in the Civil Service pension scheme, and Capita, who are their new employers, won't give them a transitional loan for their failures under the pension scheme. I mean, you couldn't make this up, could you? But all these people are disadvantaged in different ways and can't get transition loans. Could we have a look at it?
I would certainly. Clive, would you be able to, perhaps through the chair, just send me that directly, please, and I will most certainly look at that.
Right, we'll do. The Unite one isn't in writing, but I can pass that information on to you as well. Unite will give that to me as well. Yeah.
And I should, just as a matter of disclosure, refer to my own entry in the members' register about support from Unite the Union.
Well, I am as well, so we can both.
Minister, we've got one more question, but I as a matter of courtesy, I don't mind if you leave, because I know you've got a sensitive meeting to go to, so it's entirely up. I mean, your officials are perfectly welcome to answer it, but if you want to stay, I mean, I'm just going to bring in Blake Stevenson.
Okay.
Blake, please.
I'll be brief, Chair, in the interest of time. I was having a quick look at the financial results for 2025, and there's a quote in there which made me chuckle. With clear priorities for 2026, we remain focused on disciplined execution. I think we can all agree here that Capita have not been involved in disciplined execution. They've been an absolute complete disaster. And but I'm interested actually in just zooming out a little bit and thinking about the UK government's overall exposure to Capita, because I think the British public need to know what risks we face, what risks there are to using Capita as a whole. So to the extent you're able to share, and you may need to follow up in writing, would you be able to explain how many contracts we have or statements of work we have with Capita? What is the value of it? And are there any other contracts where you have similar such concerns that really need to be investigated?
So the answer to your top question, not just for central government across the public sector, is 85 is the answer to your question. But on the commercial, I'll defer to the government's commercial team on that.
Yeah, so as the Minister says, we've got 85 contracts in total. I think it's 39 with government and 46 with the wider public sector. So all of the government contracts, in terms of the transparency of performance information, all major contracts have to publish 3 of the most critical KPIs on .gov every quarter. So you can actually see the performance of all of the government contracts at the moment. I think there are, outside of this contract, there are 2 other contracts that are showing red KPIs, which are the Army recruitment contract, which is about to expire and transition to a different provider, I think in about 6 months. And the teacher's pension contract is also currently showing red. So they are 2 contracts that we are very focused on in the Cabinet Office as we manage the total relationship. We are very sensitive to Capita's role in delivering a significant amount of public services across those contracts.
So, Kat, I'm not going to ask you this question, but I would just ask you if you could write to us the most sensitive group, I think, of all of the bereavement cases. Yeah. There's still 4,300 of those outstanding, 3,700 with requiring information. Could you write to us and tell us when that is going to reach service levels, please? Because they really are some really tragic cases.
And Chair, would just say the 2 cases I mentioned, of Miriam Cartwright and Mickey King, they've been waiting since last year. Last year. These are people who've been bereaved. It's just not acceptable.
We entirely agree. And as we committed to at the beginning, so we've got Capita giving us their service rectification plan on the 14th of July. We will obviously share with you all of that data, and you'll have an opportunity to ask Capita directly what their plans are. But it's clearly not good enough.
Can I thank all of you very much today? It's not an easy subject, this. I wish it were better, but it isn't. But what we're really all about is to try and get the scheme back on track so that those pension members who are entitled to the money from the scheme are able to get it without too much fuss and in a reasonable level of time. So, Minister, can I thank you very much? Thank all of your team. We will, the transcript for this session will be up and running in the next few days. Thereafter, we'll consider with the joint committees what further action we wish to take. But again, thank you very much. Order. Welcome back to this joint session of the Public Accounts Committee and the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee on Wednesday the 8th of July 2026. As some people who were in the room will know, earlier we had heard evidence from the Cabinet Office on why performance has been so unacceptably poor since Capita have taken over the contract, and their perspective of what remains to be done to restore service to acceptable levels. Despite our strong views on Capita's performance with this contract, we are grateful that you're appearing today. It has not been difficult to secure your appearance, and you are facing up to your responsibilities by giving evidence, so thank you for that. That having been said, as you would expect, our scrutiny will be robust and challenging, but I hope fair. Good temper and moderation are hallmarks of parliamentary debate, which we will uphold this afternoon. We're not here to castigate you, but we want to understand exactly what has gone wrong. So today we will be seeking answers from you as to why you have failed to restore service levels by the end of June, which has already been extended from the end of March, and what more Capita can do to ensure that all eligible scheme members and their spouses can fully access their pensions, to which they have been made a contract for many years, a contribution for many years. So a warm welcome to all of you. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Adolfo, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Adolfo Hernandez. I'm the Group Chief Executive.
Thank you. Richard, please.
I am Richard Holroyd. I'm the Chief Executive of the Capita Public Service Division.
And Chris.
Chair, I am Chris Clements. I'm the Managing Director of Capita Pension Solutions.
Thank you very much for coming today. Adolfo, did you want to make any opening remarks, or do you want to just go straight into questions?
Thank you, Chair. I would love to have the opportunity to deeply and first and foremost apologise. I would like to apologise to all the members who have been receiving a very poor service at a very difficult and challenging time in their lives. They are citizens that have worked for the country for many years in a variety of very critical positions, and at this time of their life, in hardest of possible circumstances, are unable to get the retirement and the solutions that they truly deserve. And from everything that we are responsible for, and on behalf of the company and mine, sincerely, biggest apologies, and reassure you that we will not stop until we get this fixed.
Well, thank you for that apology, but I think on behalf of scheme members, what we really want to do is make sure you get that back to service levels as soon as possible. So in order to help us with that, with a few questions, I'm going to start with the chairman of the PACAC committee, Simon Hall, please.
Thank you, Jane. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Let me ask you a sort of mood music question, if I may. How does Capita view His Majesty's government? Is it a cash cow to be milked to the point of dropping exhaustion, or a valued client? And I think I'm correct to say, correct me if I'm not right, HMG is Capita's largest client.
Indeed. So we view His Majesty's government as a partner. We pride ourselves on working across a variety of challenges and opportunities where the government has decided to look for external expertise and skills and capabilities to work and delight the government. We take all matters related to the government extremely seriously. And over these 80 plus contracts that we have with the public sector, we focus on delivering a high quality service. Over 90% of our KPIs are green, but that is not going to help those members of the CSPS scheme, but unfortunately we fail to deliver. But we live and die by making sure that that 90% becomes 93, 95, 97. This is what we do for a living. And we are a critical part, I think, in delivering for the government, whether it's social benefits or providing national resilience or helping the forces or helping social service provision and a number of others. And we do that with pride, and I think we do that very well, even if in this particular case, and I apologise again, we didn't deliver up to the standard that was expected and that the members deserved.
So let's just try and pull that a little bit apart. Inability to run to customer satisfaction a telephone helpline. An inability to deliver a reliable, transparent, accessible portal. The need to have HMRC provided surge teams of around 150 people. Bereaved, awaiting payment, people awaiting settlement figures. And as the numbers progress on the backlog, of course, new people are joining, so you're running to stand still. Promises made to government, to Cabinet Office during the contracting process, that the 2-year transition period would lead to the digital AI revolution, to deliver a world-class, world-leading pension service. None of that met neither the novel nor the basic. I wasn't privy to your evidence which you gave to the PAC. I chair the PACAC. But I understand that you gave that committee and had given ministers of the Crown a cast iron guarantee and assurance that the end of June date would be met. So notwithstanding the additional surge, notwithstanding the fact that one would hope that through the chain of internal Capita managerial reporting, an alarm bell was ringing, none of the key service delivery has been met to a standard which our constituents deem to be acceptable, this joint committee believes is tolerable, and that His Majesty's government believes either meets the contract or delivers value for money. So, in basic terms, what in the name of all that is holy went wrong? Because this is systemic failure, not a one-off. This is systemic failure. And are you just resignedly coasting now to the moment when the frustration level of government is reached and the contract is taken from you? In short, you are just running down the clock. And the people who are caught in the crosshairs of that strategic decision is, as always, the poor bloody infantry, i.e. those who require their pensions, who are dealing with bereavement and across the piece.
There is a lot to unpack there, and I can fully understand why the committee would be interested in all of these matters, and I'm committed that we will give you all the answers that you need through my answer and the rest of the session. Reiterate again my apology and that of the company. And
could I just say, you offered at the top of the meeting an apology, which Sir Geoffrey, as the chairman of this joint committee, has accepted on behalf of all of us. It will add nothing to the sum of human understanding or the milk of human kindness from this committee towards Capita to repeat it. Let's park the apology. It has been accepted. It is not a substitute, I'm afraid, for clear answers to specific questions, which I would now like you to turn with some forensic detail.
Okay, I will do that. So first and foremost, this is a very complex scheme, complex than we thought, realistically, and it is like nothing that our colleagues in pensions have seen before in terms of the ramifications. We have served pension schemes in the defined benefits space for nearly 50 years. We do over 200 of them. What makes this one unique is not the size, right? It's 1.7 million. But you've got the size, you've got the factor, you've got some 300 different employers in it. You've got some employers that are no longer there.
No, I know that, but surely you realised that when you submitted your bid for the tender. That didn't come as a great surprise. Surely that wasn't like a light bulb moment.
Indeed, when you submitted the bid for tender, and I am accountable to deliver it, but the same as the Paymaster General, I have inherited this contract, and I will do everything that it takes to get it right. One, we got there, the complexity is very high. So that's number one. Number two, you wanted some details on backlog, and I think you went through the details of this morning on the backlog. I would just say the backlog was higher than anybody expected. We were told to believe that it could be higher, it could be twice as much, but the Paymaster General just admitted we didn't really know the size of the backlog. But a backlog of something on cases that were originated last week or 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago is not the same as a backlog of something that was originated 1, 2, 3 or 4 years ago. And the backlog of I need you to adjust my tax code is not the same of a backlog case when there is a particular circumstance. Somebody had worked for a particular government department that no longer exists and the service record is incomplete. The sheer scale of the data that was missing upon transfer is huge. We're talking about 20 million records, and these are effectively members' service records that were either incomplete or missing or inaccurate. This business is about calculating and administering pensions, and the data, the service data, is at the very core of any calculation.
Okay, maybe we'll just pause there and forgive my ignorance on this point, but you inherited the contract, or you won the contract, it having been taken away from my CSP. And it was taken away from my CSP for reasons which I think we all readily have to hand. They don't need relitigating here. But they had been paying out pensions to those who were then in receipt of it. And as members of Parliament, we weren't getting a vast amount of people coming into our inboxes or surgeries saying that they had a problem. So what I don't know is what happened to this massive amount of data, this lacuna of data that you identified, which you rest an argument as to why you have not been able to meet your contractual requirements. On historical data, my CSP must surely have had it. So is this purely a matter of incompatible software or a lack of industry during the transition period? Possibly both.
If I may,
sure.
We took over the payroll as the Minister said, and we have not missed a single payroll. So we continue to make the payments. So we've paid out £4.8 billion of payments to more than 700,000 members. We have ensured that through that transition that we understood all the rules and all the things that feed into that. What you can see from both the anecdotal examples and the management information that there are cases that have waited a very long time. And when we first took over the call centre, we received a lot of phone calls from people who said, I've been waiting for you to take over to now fix my old case. You mentioned the call centre. We stood up a call centre to take 7,000 calls a day. We were receiving 25,000 calls. We are now receiving 9,000. We've stood up a second call centre. We've massively increased the amount of training, and we are now answering the calls within 8 minutes, and over 50% of those calls. Over 50% of those calls are one and done, so they are completed on the call where the person gets the action that they want. Since we took over, as Angela pointed out at the start, we've done over 250,000 pieces of work. And we continue to work through all that old data, continue to work through the missing member records. We continue to work through all of that. To be clear to the committee, we also have had technology problems. As the Minister and Angela pointed out, we have had those technology problems, and they have meant that it has taken us longer to resolve the things. So that both things are true. We inherited data that we have had problems understanding. The scheme rules are exceptionally complicated. It really is a very complicated scheme, and we have not been able to deploy the technology that would allow us to get there. What you have seen...
That was the purpose of the transition period.
Absolutely. And I am sorry that the technology we have deployed didn't work in cases, and we have worked tirelessly...
Hang on, let's just pause that. You had a transition period,
yes,
the purpose of which was not to, metaphorically, I don't mean this disparagingly, twiddle corporate thumbs. It was to prepare the ground to ensure that there could be as seamless a transition as possible from one contract provider to another. At what point did you say to the Cabinet Office, either to ministers or to senior officials, we're not as confident about the robustness of the technology as we hoped to be, we need a bit of extra time?
We have, throughout both the transition and post-transition, been transparent with the Cabinet Office of the status of all of the elements of our project.
That may be true, but I'm afraid that doesn't answer my question. At what point did you tell the Cabinet Office that the technological solution that you had promised in the bidding process for the contract was taking longer to reach the levels of scope and reliability that you recognised was required?
If I may, it is slightly complicated by there are many different types of technology and parts of technology, all of which are delivered in different phases and different ways. So you heard previously that there are transition milestones, and we discussed previously in our evidence that there are transmission milestones that were missed, and we then caught those up. So each of those represented a different part of the technology solution. The part that has caused us the problems in processing the cases is the end-to-end back-office processing, where our ability to handle the complex cases and our ability to do the complex calculations at scale, and that is the bit that it has taken longer to deploy, and that is the bit that we are continuing to deliver. We have, since we were last here, we have taken our ability to do back-office cases from 7,000 a week to 17,000 a week. We have deployed additional skilled resources from other parts of my business. We have taken the lessons that we have learned on how to deal with this particular idiosyncrasies of the scheme to work out different ways of dealing with the problem. And we were going to continue to do that until we have made sure every single member has got the pension they deserve.
I don't want to, my final question is this, I don't want to question the honesty and veracity of an answer that you gave a moment or so ago, but I think we would like to see, if nobody else does, I would like to see some data to back up something, Mr. Clements, that you've just told this committee. And that was, and forgive me, I find it hard to believe, that there were people who were not receiving their pension or not getting everything that they thought they were entitled to under the operation of my CSP, who were waiting to have that resolved until Capita had the contract and was operational. Bearing in mind that the vast majority of these people, this pension is not an icing on the cake. It's the cake. It's what pays the bills, the rent, the mortgage, the food on the table, etc. So I would love to know how many people who were prepared to forego receiving an adequate pension or their pension in full, whilst the corporate contractual wheels between the government Cabinet Office and Capita rolled. Sorry, Mr. Holroyd. It was a question to Mr. Clements.
Of course. So if I may, that there is points of our previous evidence that we've given to this committee is that there were well over 1,000 complaints open when we inherited this case. Of the 90,000, there were many hundreds that had waited more than a year, and there were some that even longer, maybe some more than 2 years.
That I'm not challenging you on. What I'm asking you to back up is what you told the committee just a moment or so ago, which was which you were using as a reason to justify the spike in queries that you were dealing with, which was because people had pressed the pause button on prosecuting their resolution to their case until Capita sort of, night on a white charger, rode over the hill.
Yes, so
So the figures on that piece, to substantiate that assertion would be helpful.
In our first week of operation back in December, we conducted surveys of callers and the reasons. Once we noticed the trend, we began asking the question, had you waited to call back? And around 13% of all calls in that first week who were surveyed answered that they had been waiting for Capita to take over in order for them to get their call resolved. There were also a number of aged cases, and people called back and their statement was something along the lines of, I haven't bothered calling about my old case, which I've had huge problems with. Please, now you're in place, can you fix it?
Okay. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'm going to call Catherine in a minute, but I just wanted to also challenge something you said, Chris, because you will have heard disbelief from the audience when you said that there's only an 8-minute delay on the phone system. My information is that actually for the non-urgent cases there's a 24-minute delay, and that has actually gone out from the previous hearing we had when it was a 17-minute delay. So it's actually getting worse again.
So, in the month of July, the average wait time for all calls was 8 minutes and 47 seconds.
Yeah, but not all calls, but some people are still waiting up to 24 minutes, which is quite a long time.
So there is a variance between the longest waits and the shortest waits, and as we stated in previous evidence, we prioritise those calls for bereavements and hardship cases, and that means that non-prioritised calls do tend to wait longer than the average.
What is the longest wait? Your latest figures available?
I'm really sorry, I don't have that number available to me. I will happy to write to you to confirm that.
You can write to us, but I mean clearly waits have, and it's gone out from 17 minutes to 24. That is not acceptable.
Absolutely. So we are continuing to take actions to reduce the call volumes, to ensure that cases are completed, to ensure that the FAQs are updated, and to ensure that calls are one and done, i.e. the member gets what they want when they're on the phone. All of these are the actions we're taking to improve the experience of everybody on the contact centre.
While we're on systems, let's go to the portal. We were hearing too many cases. People feed their information into the portal. They get a reply back saying that their case will be dealt with. They never hear anything more. That is also unacceptable.
Absolutely, and I apologise for anybody who's had that experience. Since the portal went live, we've had 25,000 successful uploads of documentation, and we've had more than 300,000 successful downloads of documentation. We have identified a number of cases where there has been a problem with the upload. We have identified and fixed that upload, and we have followed up with members to make sure that no documents were lost. We are actively communicating with all members from whom we are awaiting a document to make sure that they aren't caught by that, and we are helping anyone to expedite their case.
Thank you very much. Simon, did you want to come back?
So why is your client so livid?
This service is not, we are not meeting our SLAs, we are not achieving a good service. This is not how my other clients experience pensions service, and this is not acceptable, and we will continue to improve until it is acceptable.
Bereavement and complex, yes. Do you accept that so lamentable has been your performance, and how by a silver thread your corporate reputation is hanging? that you haven't got the luxury now of triaging when it comes to how you handle calls, i.e. each call, irrespective of genesis, should be dealt with as pressing and urgent, and you should be resourcing the facility in order to deal with all of that. You haven't got the capacity, reputationally, or the luxury to triage anymore.
We do treat all calls as urgent, and we do continue to do so. And we continue to make sure that not just is the phone answered, but that it is answered by someone who has had the training and understands and can help the member.
Audience participation is all very well, but we must have a courtesy to allow the witnesses to reply, please. Chris Clements, please.
In previous parts of the recovery of this service, we have increased the call centre with non-skilled staff, and that has led to dissatisfaction, as I understand, because then you're not getting...
So you have a bad situation, which you then decide to make worse by putting untrained staff to answer telephone calls. That's what you've just told us, Mr. Clements.
That's what you just said. Unbelievably.
Is it? That's what you've just told us. Correct?
No, that is sorry. That is.
I think the record will show that you may have misspoken and wish to clarify, but you've just told the committee that in order to try to meet addressing the backlog, you put people who were not qualified to answer telephone calls. Guess what? To answer telephone calls.
May I clarify?
Yes, of course.
So we have, when the surge team from both our surge and the government surge came into force, we made sure that everyone was trained on how to answer the phone, how to deal with cases, how to record the information, how to conduct themselves. There are contact centre operatives who are exceptionally skilled in pensions who can do administrative tasks to be the one and done. As we discussed in the last committee, we have continued to invest in the training of the contact centre so that they have more and more ability to do more things on the call instead of taking in the case, creating a case and sending it to the back office. So what I meant was...
Well, that's good, but that's not what you said.
I apologise for misspeaking. So everyone had initial training, but it is the detailed pensions training that we have been deploying, which is what has increased the one and done statistics since we were last here.
Thank you.
Can I, on the point about where our reputation is, and as the person who runs the public sector business, we absolutely recognise that point. We are completely conscious of it in every single meeting we have with every customer across our estate, in every service we deliver. So it was me that committed to Chairman Sir Geoffrey Clifford Brown that we would hit the end of June date. We threw all our resources in there in order to do that. We did not scrimp, hold back. We've moved resources from elsewhere across the public sector division to do that. We as you heard from some of Mr. Clements' testimony, we've moved things forward a lot, but not enough. And we fell short of the plan that we committed to. We're absolutely living through that reputational impact. I didn't want the committee to think for a minute we're not aware of it and we're not getting everything we can behind moving this because our reputation relies on fixing it.
Have you considered your position?
No.
There's a question actually to Mr. Holroyd. Have you considered your position?
I'm sorry, I thought I heard an answer. Yes, I have. And I had that conversation with my chief executive as we've been through this. As I think I was asked by your colleague at the previous committee, it's very easy to say, yes, I'm going to turn to the right and walk away, but that would leave my colleagues without the support that they need through this. And that's not, from my perspective, the right thing to do, and it's not the values I've been brought up with.
If I may also add, I am the group chief executive. Ultimately, I'm responsible to making sure this gets delivered. I'm responsible for its failure today. but I'm also responsible to marshal the resources, the budget, the overspend, the people, the talent, the operational efficiency, and trying to expedite every single thing that we have to do in Capita to ensure that Chris and Richard and their teams can fly as fast as we possibly can so that we can restore this service to the level of quality that members deserve.
Okay, Sam, please.
So no one's resigning. It doesn't sound as though anyone's been sacked. I mean, is the Board of Directors looking to impose any penalties on anyone within Capita for this failure?
Well, all of us serve at the service and the discretion of the Board of Directors in all matters. So it's up to them. We've been working very closely with the Board of Directors during this period, not only going into the December 1st, but before, making sure they had visibility of the criticality, the project, what was being done, the resources we were doing, the budget, overspend that we were going to go through, because it is the right thing to do, just to make sure that the executive works and executes, and that the board is there to advise and align and keep us accountable.
Sure. I mean, the word accountable is interesting because it doesn't sound like there's been very much accountability. I mean, it's a private company, it's a matter for the Board of Directors. I just find it surprising. But Mr. Hernandez, you sit on the board, I understand, so I wonder if you can answer this. Has there been discussion at the board of treating His Majesty's government as a key client? Have the Board of Directors expressed any concerns at the treatment the government's been receiving?
Absolutely.
And what actions have they therefore put in place?
Well, we've done a lot of actions. This is taken and featured in copious amount of meetings, online, offline, formal. We've done investment plans. We put the service normalisation plan that was created at the beginning of May, was put and presented formally into the board. But they've been getting updates, they've been asking, they've been supporting. The chairman has been personally involved in the discussions where required. So I can only support the work that the support we've received from the board in getting this done, but also the fair challenge. Are we doing the right things? Are we thinking outside the box? Is there any other thing that we could be doing that we haven't done? And they have been doing what you expect them to do, both support, guide and challenge at the same time.
You all consider.
All right, and we need to, I think, move on, please. Catherine, because we haven't got too much time.
Just to follow up on your comments, Mr. Hernandez, how much is the overspend on the contract so far? You've referenced it a couple of times.
Yeah, we have, and as you can imagine, that's not a figure that is commercially sensitive, and it would be something that I couldn't discuss in public, but because it has, as a listed company, it has implications. So I'll be happy to have a more private discussion, or maybe write privately to the chairman on this when the moment arrives.
I'd be very interested, because I know Mr. Holroyd mentioned progress, but I don't really understand what the progress is. From where I see it, it feels like you're going backwards, not forwards. I may have misunderstood from the reams of numbers that were given, but if you look just at what you define as the most pressing and urgent cases, bereavement, ill health, those numbers are going up, not down. And I have a case of a constituent who died at the weekend that's been trying to get a response from Capita since January. I raised it over a month ago and I've had no response. So how are they urgent and priority cases if even an MP representing a terminally ill constituent doesn't even get a reply?
I can only apologise.
We don't want you to apologise.
I do understand,
explain.
but I want to leave with an apology because it's simply not good enough.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to tell you what is it that we're doing. Chris mentioned earlier we have a triage system, and it's a triage system that we define with the search team from Second Permanent Secretary. The whole set of steps, what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, what are we going to triage, how are we going to go and do that. Then we have invested in recovering what we fell short on the automations. because while I can mention the backlog, the complexity, the data issues, I also have to be honest and say we fell short on getting the automations on time. And this is important because the automations give us the throughput and the ability to deal with these urgent and vulnerable cases also a lot faster. To a statement you made earlier, what is different now? I think we've gone from a system that was in distress to a system that now, in the first half of the year, had a capacity problem, or to a system where we now have a backlog problem. So I think it's been stabilized. We've got the capacity as the numbers that Second Permanent Secretary just shared this morning, which with 100% aligned. The problem is now we need to use that capacity for the next few months to just go and process as many cases, the urgent cases first. And we've actually made, in the last couple of weeks, we made tremendous progress, and the numbers have gone in many areas, all going in the right direction. So we can write to you with some more specific data to prove to you that we're moving forward and not backwards.
Hey, and presumably this surge team, though, that's being funded by Capita, or is it being funded by the government?
Well, we never intended, in the first place, we never intended to have a search team.
No, I know, but is it being funded by the government or Capita?
I made an offer to a commitment to the Paymaster General, the Minister of the Cabinet Office, that we would start picking it up from April. And we haven't had a commercial discussion.
Stop you there, Adolfo. I don't know whether you were listening to I think you were listening to the previous hearing. The Minister said that was completely unacceptable, that you had got to pick up the entire bill of the Surge T from the 2nd of February when it started.
I heard him saying that. We haven't had that conversation yet. I made an offer.
Well, surely it would be reasonable for this committee that you make a commitment this morning, because considering the government was good enough to put that surge team in, and as you heard me thank the surge team, the whole situation would have been far worse without the surge team.
I would agree.
But can you make a commitment this morning on behalf of Capita that you will pay from the 2nd of February? That seems to me only reasonable.
I think there are a number of variables here. I
don't want flannel. I want a commitment. You are the Chief Executive Officer of Capita. You are in a position to make that decision. Will you give that commitment to this committee this afternoon?
If I can just say, there is a lot of decisions that need to be made. There's no isolated decisions. There are decisions that pertain to this particular investment. There are decisions about others. I think we need to have a commercial discussion, put them all together. I hear you loud and clear. I heard the Minister loud and clear. I heard the Permanent Secretary loud and clear. I know what's been asked of us. When we sit around the table, this will be taken favourably, but we haven't sat around the table. It would be a little bit irresponsible for me to make a commitment before I have...
I don't think it would be irresponsible at all. I think it would be the right thing to do. But anyway, I hear what you say. Yeah. I think it's an appalling reply, I have to say.
Yeah. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah.
You know, could I respond?
Of course, yes, Catherine.
I was going to ask that question because you're talking about recognition of the reputational damage, not to mention the damage to people's lives. Therefore, that's why I asked about the overspend as well, because I think Capita needs to pick up the ticket here for the failure to deliver on what was promised. And no matter how much you explain how difficult it is and how complex the contract is that you took on, you made a commitment. You haven't delivered on it, and I think to pick up the bill for that rather than the taxpayer would be one way of making some amends for this mess. The other way I think you could immediately help would be to be able to enable MPs to be able to escalate concerns. I don't want any more constituents who are dying to not be able to even help them, and that's a position you have put us in, not to mention our constituents.
Totally fair, and this is something we...
I've not had it with any organisation. People answer their MPs when they represent their constituents, but Capita doesn't.
We noticed that we were failing short in that domain. I think it was around April. didn't have to have a lot of debate. We figured out what was the best possible way to do that. We resourced a team to go under those sessions. Speaking of memory, Chris will correct me, I think we've done nearly 300 drop-in sessions working with the Cabinet Office, and we have another 150 scheduled to happen in July, and we will do more and better. We've also learned the first few ones were not up to scratch. There was more detailed information. There was a request clearly from case handlers that we needed to just be more specific, use a different language that wasn't as technical. So we are listening to the feedback, we are engaging, we've done more, and we will continue to do more. And if we don't raise the bar good enough, I'd love to have the opportunity to hear from you and improve it again.
Sure you will.
You will be hearing from us, yeah.
Could I just go on to these bereavement cases, Adolfo? When you took over, I think the number of and bearing in mind these are the most sensitive cases, as Catherine has said. It's, you know, if somebody's dying and they can't get the money they're entitled to, this is really, really sensitive cases. I think you took over about 15,000 cases, such cases. Today, I think there are about 4,300 being processed and about another 3,700 waiting for information. So it seems to me that you're not really making the inroads quick enough into this most sensitive of categories. What do you intend to do about it? And by the way, you put the deadline back from March to May for this most sensitive of categories. That's appalling, isn't it?
I absolutely and I will continue to apologise for people waiting longer than they should. We have deployed a new piece of technology in the last couple of weeks, and in the first week of July we have closed over 1,000 of those cases, and we will continue to close those cases as fast as possible. The rectification plan, as discussed in the previous evidence, will include a very clear and measurable plan to make sure that we close down all those cases and get within SLA on that.
Let's just try and get something out of this session this afternoon. When, in the case of bereavement cases, will you get to your service level agreement?
We are going to close out all of those cases that are with us and workable in the next 2 months, and then we will and as I said in the last week, we've already closed well over 1,000 cases, and we will continue to do so. There are a number of data and member record and other issues in there that we will work through, and we are currently making sure that we do all those as fast as possible, but they are a tiny bit more complicated. I would also add that we at no point would ever not follow the process as set out, so that it is a complicated process, and we will continue to make sure we follow all the rules in that process, so we're not taking any shortcuts, and we're making sure we do these cases properly.
So of the workable cases, which I assume means you have proper data, they will be sorted within 2 months?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Good.
What's your percentage breakdown?
Sorry, of workable and unworkable?
Yeah.
On death in service, 218 are workable, and there are 618 outstanding. And for the ones that aren't workable, we are working with the task force to go through and make sure that we either receive the documents in or fix the underlying data problem, underlying member record issues. So we don't not work on the unworkable ones. We are actively managing them, but it is there are dependencies, which means that we can't control when they will become workable. As soon as they become workable, we work them as fast as possible.
About a third.
Sorry?
About a third.
Yes.
So you narrowed the category to death in service there. I was talking about bereavement cases in general.
I apologise.
And does the commitment that for all those bereavement cases in general will be sorted out, the workable ones, within 2 months?
Yes, and if you would like, I'd give you the same numbers on that. So of the 4,500 that Angela talked about in the previous session that are available to process, 1,465 are workable. The others we are working on either the data or the documentation.
And what about ill health in retirement?
It is 360 workable out of 429.
Okay. That's useful anyway. Thank you very much indeed. Clive.
Thanks, Chair. Well, I think everyone who's waiting for answers from you will be delighted to know now, Mr. Hernandez, that they're no longer part of a capacity problem, but part of a backlog problem. I'm sure that's very reassuring to be told that. So you said a few minutes ago that you'll be waiting to sit round the table with the Minister and Permanent Secretary and other officials. You mean you haven't been sitting around the table in the last few weeks?
No, I haven't had the pressure of meeting of the last few weeks. We met before the December 1st. We exchanged a number of letters and updates, as you would expect, following that, but we haven't met in person. But we've been in touch with the rest of the Permanent Secretary, Chief Commercial Officer, Second Permanent Secretary, so the engagement has been quite tight.
Right. Mr. Holroyd and Mr. Clements, you've met with officials in the Cabinet Office regularly, haven't you? So why couldn't these assurances about the search team and who was going to pay for it have been dealt with in those meetings?
I think the Second Permanent Secretary and the leader of the task force said this in the previous session. What we've been focused on with her agreement is absolutely focusing on return of service. There are commercial conversations to go. The Government Chief Commercial Officer explained what's happening in terms of payment with being withheld. We understand that. We understand that, and I think he said this too, that the full bill for what we will be required to pay will be defined once we get back into service level agreements. So it hasn't been a case in all my conversations with the Government Chief Commercial Officer. Chris has been working very closely with the leader of the task force. So we understand, because we understand the contract well, exactly the sort of penalties that are coming, the service credit penalties, etc., etc. But we haven't taken time at this stage to total it all up. And I think that the Second Permanent Secretary gave you those numbers of what we agree with those estimations of what the government has spent to date. So it isn't a case that we're avoiding it. It's not a case of trying to adjust it or of a negotiation. We are required to deliver a rectification plan, and I think that was mentioned in the previous session. That we have a meeting in the diary on the 16th of July, to meet with our opposite numbers. We will go through that process there, the discussion of an auditor, in order to, and that will be at our cost, to appoint the auditor. We'll do that in partnership with the head of the task force again. So please accept my assurance, we're not avoiding it, dodging it. It's just that they will produce the bill, and when we produce the bill, we'll sit down and go through it, and because we understand the contract, we know the nature of what's coming.
Right. So what we're also very interested in, what's coming in terms of actually service delivery. So when are you actually going to get all the service you provide up to the contractual arrangements you entered into?
So if I pick that up, there are what we have committed to is that by the 1st of September, we'll take all those that are in current retirement process. So the people, as I think the head of the task force said, have just recently retiring because the machine now works. So the engine is now working. We could take those people through, and we will deliver those by no later than the 1st of September. So that means those people we can get through the engine because it works. The complex cases, the more complex cases, are those that we referred to earlier. We actually refer to with the task force as the stock. So those people who are sitting in waiting for payment, and some of them have been sitting for some time. The commitment there is we will get those paid and cleared by the 1st of September. This goes to our point that we've built the machine is now able to operate. There are some highly complex cases that we inherited, and if I may, you've raised some of those with us before. Some of those cases there are about 600, which we largely inherited. In some cases, those service records are not complete. So to Charlotte Kane's point earlier, we have to sit with the HMRC and the Department of Work and Pensions to recreate that service record. Because in some cases that Department of State doesn't exist anymore, and because the member of the scheme left the scheme some years ago. So there are a number of those that are highly complex.
They've got 600 of those.
It's roughly 600.
Right. So apart from those,
so if I put it into those,
when will all the rest be dealt with according to your contract?
So the numbers that I gave you, and bearing in mind we're taking inflow in all the time, as at the numbers we had yesterday, what we're committing to is those that are coming in normal process now will be completed by the 30th of September. Those that are in the backlog element, as we referred to it earlier, perhaps incorrectly, we'll get to by the 1st of September.
So, by the 30th of September, with the exception of the 600 complicated cases, all cases then will be dealt with from that date in line with the contract.
And I think the important thing to note, and this isn't a swerve, because we're taking inflow in all the time,
but
we'll always have a
to deal with cases within a time limit, which assumes you're always going to get cases coming in. Doesn't it?
We'll have a work in progress running all the time.
But all the cases, including the new ones coming in, we dealt with according to the contract specifications by the end of September.
Yes. And there's a key point around SLAs. I think as the previous team sitting here mentioned, there are a whole bunch of SLAs and sub-SLAs. Those SLAs are like a chess clock. So when we receive a request for a pension, we have to get that quote out to the member within a certain number of days. And we have to hit that. That's the SLA. That then goes to the member. If the member then returns that to us within the number of days set out in the contract, then the chess clock starts again, and we then have 3 days to then respond. So those are the ways the SLA has written, which is why we end up with this phrase around workable and cases that are waiting on other inputs. So one of the reasons that in trying to sort of explain it as SLA is that currently the way the contract is, because we inherited those 600 cases, we couldn't be an SLA anywhere because those 600 cases are beyond an age.
Asking for your assurances, though, I mean, what was said to us as well is often we assume that when you're sending information then to pensioners, to members in future, that you will actually be sending them correct information. Because one of the things we've been told is that information goes out, it's rushed through, it's inaccurate, it's wrong, so people then have to respond. Then this response from the person you're writing to goes into a black hole, and they don't hear them for weeks.
Yes, so we continue to make sure that we monitor quality, we monitor those cases like that, and ensure that we...
We're saying it doesn't happen.
Sorry?
The responses come back to you and nothing happens. And then when they're escalated, nothing happens. That's what we're told repeatedly.
And we apologise for the delays, and we are continuing to work...
You keep apologising, but better you just sorted it, wouldn't it?
We are continuing to work through the open cases that we have and ensure that we move them all as fast as possible.
As far as we can see, we got a commitment by the end of September, and we'll get that written out. But just to say, Mr. Holroyd, I'm going to ask this very bluntly. When you came before and gave us a commitment about timescales and finishing, I said to you at the end, why should I believe a word you tell us? I was wrong to believe you then. Why should I believe you now?
I don't have an adequate answer, really, because I can say it again, and I'm sure that you'll be in the same position. We have to prove through delivery, and that's the only answer I can give, really.
well, we'll wait and see again.
Clive, thank you. I have to say I am pretty sceptical. We were given the deadline of March, we were then given the deadline of April, May, June, and they were all missed. So, it's not very good, is it, Richard, really? And the more it goes on, the worse Capita's reputation is getting. They may well not get other government contracts. You're not doing yourselves any good, I have to say.
Chair, if I may, you're absolutely correct. This is having a very negative impact on our reputation and our ability to handle a contract like this, for which we are responsible. But I wanted to come back at a point that was made earlier. We are not going to be just sitting out time. We are here and we are going to be in charge until we're not, if that's what it comes to happen. And we will work to ensure that the members get the service that they get. We have been late on the technology, on some of the automations, but they are coming in, as some of the numbers from Chris suggest. We've got a number of other automations coming in, even as we speak, through the summer, that will improve the numbers even further. And then hopefully they will become, once we've delivered them, once we've given you the fact, new reasons to believe that we are 100% committed to get this one right. We do that in the vast majority of what we do for the government. As I said earlier, over 90% of the KPIs, they're isolated areas in a number of contracts, but the vast majority, so we're very proud of it. We're very proud of what we're doing with the government for the country, and it's in our interest to make sure that we get this addressed firmly and quickly.
Not sure I'd be proud of what you were doing, but anyway, that's a different point. Lauren, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the escalated cases, what is the SLA if you have an escalated case? So in case of my constituents where there's somebody suffering from cancer, there's somebody who's suffering real financial hardship, doesn't know how they're going to pay their bills. They are telling me that it's a 4 to 5 standard waiting time for their case to be dealt with. What is the SLA that you are working to, or the timetable that you are working to for escalated cases like those ones I just described?
So we are working as fast as possible and as fast as the process and systems allow us to do. The contract is very clear on the SLAs. It is the same as the case, so it is the 2, 3, 5, or 10 days, depending on the nature of the case. But we are, as we have said, in a backlog situation where we are prioritising and getting through the cases as fast as we can.
So you don't have any internal real time frames that you're working to for those cases that we can understand as MPs? You are operating on the basis that you will try and meet those. It's just as soon as you can.
We are working through all of the open cases and all of the backlogs that we've discussed and closing them as fast as we can. And as has been stated, we are not currently within the SLA, so we are not currently able to close them in that time frame.
I think there's an issue around being able to track how much you're improving, particularly on those cases which are really material to people's circumstances. If you aren't setting a time frame that within 2 weeks, so half what non-urgent cases would be expecting. If you're not measuring it, then it becomes very difficult to give us assurance that you're making the progress that you need to make.
So we do measure, and we do share the measurement of all of that with the task force who hold us to account to make sure that we're moving those cases through as fast as possible.
Okay. In terms of all the services that you're undertaking and that you've talked through this afternoon, which are the services that are most at risk of failing again?
Sorry, within the civil service. Yes. So as we've said, and I've said, a number of the services are not within the SLA at the moment, but we are continuing to process all those cases. So we are able to process all the cases, and it's now a case of getting through the backlog.
And in terms of how you are prioritising your resources, how are you mitigating the risk that other services that you need to be providing are not falling over in the meantime?
So we are. We are making sure that anyone and everyone who is qualified to work on the scheme works on the scheme. We do prioritise in conjunction with the task force to make sure that we are getting to those members most at need first, and we are working through cases based upon the age and the priority, hardship-based priority.
Earlier we heard from the Minister, he described it as sort of an AI-driven data approach that you had sort of pitched as part of your successful bid. To what extent of the problems that we're talking about here in terms of the technical challenges that you're talking about are coming from that AI-driven solution that you proposed?
They are not. They are coming from the calculation of the complex benefit structures, which are done by traditional automation.
Thank you, Lauren. Charlotte, please.
Thank you, Chair. You talked at the beginning about how you were surprised by the complexity of the scheme and the size of the scheme. I have to say that surprised me because I believe Capita managed the scheme until 2012, and you had a 2-year transition period as well when you had a good chance to look at it all and understand it. We've heard about the fundamental problems, the fundamental backlogs, but another frustration that a lot of my constituents have is that when they do get through to someone, they are given a deadline for when they will hear again from Capita, when their case will be resolved. That deadline, I'm afraid, is routinely missed, and not even an apology and a sorry, the new deadline will be X. That person then has to recontact Capita. Eventually that person, that constituent, gets so frustrated that they contact me as their MP. And then I contact Capita on their behalf, and I get the same game. I get told that it will all be resolved by a deadline, and then when I go back to the constituent after that deadline to say, is it all resolved? No, it isn't, and then I have to go back to Capita. Most recently, a constituent waiting for data so they can finalise probate from last year, I was told that they would get all the paperwork by the 7th of July. As of this morning, they hadn't had it. So I would like to understand how you justify. I hear all the problems that you inherited and what have you, but how do you justify treating people like that? Why don't you give them a proper deadline for when you can sort it out and then meet that deadline? It is so stressful for them. And then the other thing, as I raised with the Cabinet Office, you will have heard, at the end of this, I know a few days seems hardly anything in the great scheme of all the months these poor people are waiting. But at the end of this, you pay them by backs, so there's a delay of several days. Why don't you have the decency to at least pay them by chaps so they get the money straight away?
Sorry, there was several parts to that question. So initially in your question, you said we administered the scheme back in 2012. We did not. We just did the payroll. So we only did the payroll. Absolutely. So, first of all, I say sorry for the people who've waited. We are, as we've mentioned before, we are not currently operating within SLA, and that means we are operating with backlogs, and it is very hard for us to make sure that we are processing things as fast as we can, and they're constantly coming against issues and delays, and we are trying to resolve those as soon as they happen so that we can get to every case as fast as possible. On the point around backs, so the majority of payments do go out by backs, and the normal payroll goes out by backs, but in issues of hardship or where there is an escalation, we do use chaps as a method where that is where when there is when it's necessary to do so. I apologise for us not hitting the deadlines that we've given the member, and we will continue to improve that, and we will continue to make sure, as I've said, to work through things as fast as possible and be honest and open in our communications.
But why are you still making promises for deadlines and then not meeting them? Why don't you assess the case and give a deadline that you are confident you can meet? That would reduce some of the stress for people.
I can only apologise that we've made that mistake, and we will look at how we're doing that. But that is what you described. That is what we are attempt to do, and obviously, as you've described, we don't always achieve that.
And going back to the Bax chap thing, why should they have to tell you they're in hardship? Right. They've been owed this money. It's taken months, maybe years, to resolve the case. Why don't you just pay the money as quickly as possible, which is chaps?
So it is not always. It is not when they don't have to tell us that it's an assessment is made on each payment as to what the most appropriate and practical payment is, depending on the nature of that payment and what it is. So the full scale payrolls where we do mass payments, they go by Bax, and that's how that automation works. So it would actually take longer to pull it out.
I get that goes through Bax because you're paying that monthly, that's fine. But when you have delayed someone getting their payment, why don't you just routinely, and could you commit now going forward to routinely pay them by chaps, so at least they get it straight away?
There is a technical problem that even when we're doing processes like lump sums and arrears that go through, they're also going through the payroll, and so therefore it's very difficult to take out large number of payments into chaps. So it would delay the process even further to do every payment by chaps. So by making sure that we are getting all the payments done as fast as possible using Bax, and then prioritising those cases where we use chaps, you get the best balance of making sure everyone gets their money as fast as possible. It's the way the automation in the system works. It's easier to. It's faster.
Easier.
Sorry,
and it's
easy.
cheaper.
I apologise. Faster is our teams, as you've heard, we are absolutely focused on getting the member the outcome they deserve, and we do not anything that is required to make sure that this service works. We're not skimping on the money.
Adolfo, what I'm hearing is that the service for members of Parliament isn't good enough. Even during the height of the pandemic, when the passport agency was in huge difficulties, they held surgeries in here with a bit of a faff. Members of Parliament could get their constituents' cases resolved in a reasonable timescale. Why can't the same thing happen here with members of Parliament's correspondence? Can we have a commitment to improving the service that members of Parliament get? Because after all, members of Parliament are desperately trying to sort out these cases on behalf of their constituents.
100%. I have my commitment. We will continue to improve this service, and we will make it work.
Thank you. Thank you. Luke, please.
Thank you, Chair. You spoke previously about deploying all the resources at your disposal to fix mechanics, fix the engine as you've explained it, and then start to churn through the backlog. What's the size of that resource you've deployed? How many people, and how much does that cost?
So the BAU operational team, we inherited 330 staff from MyCSP through Cheapy. We currently have deployed a Capita surge of 191 staff from the rest of my organisation, and then, as was discussed earlier, there is 120 of the government surge. They are then allocated to the different teams based on the skills they have. As the Second Permanent Secretary for HMRC described earlier, we focus those people with the most pensions expertise on the most difficult and complex cases. Given that they are Capita people, we have most of the Capita people focused on those complex cases. In terms of the that is the BAU staff. In terms of the technology, we have all the resources of the group, including all of the technology resources and the technology resources of our technology partners, dedicated to making sure that we deliver the technology that's required. That in total is more than 200 people across those providers.
Yeah. We can see from the NAO report that the number of staff deployed by MyCSP previously was somewhere in the region of 450 through to December 2024. Did you underestimate the resource it would require to administrate this? And is that fundamentally where you've fallen down? well, A, by breaking or the engine not working, but B, not having enough staff to then churn through the process. You've underbid the project, you've competed by putting a lower price in, and ultimately you've been found out.
We had over 95% of the people eligible for TUPE transfer chose to transfer to us, which was 330. So we inherited everybody who had MyCSP, or nearly everyone that MyCSP had working on this project. And because we identified that, as we've in previous committees made clear, the initial Capita surge was put in place before go live because we identified that some of the technology wasn't going to be there on time, so we would put that people in, and we estimated everything based upon the volumes as we understood them. As I answered a question earlier, the change of behaviour of members in December caught us out, but what we have done since is we have continued to make sure we add humans where the technology hasn't delivered, to ensure we can process as many cases as possible, but these are highly complex, detailed processes that take very skilled people.
If I may, just we do read the NAO report. This was one of the contingencies that I discussed with the Minister of the Cabinet Office, that we were putting up additional resources, 50% more, just in case, because we didn't really know the backlog. We didn't know the full scale and complexity and age of the backlog. We were putting up, but for reasons that we have already covered, that wasn't enough. So even though we've added another call centre and we put another new call centre, that has now helped us alleviate. It's not fully been enough. But I would also like just to be very clear on one thing. The way we're going to get out of this is not through more search teams. The way we are working to get out of this is through the technologies that we've started to deploy. The
backlog will be fixed with surge. The backlog will
partially, I think the scale, if I may.
I mean, to get through the backlog, you put more people on it. You fix the engine. You've described it as a backlog problem. If you wanted to fix that, you could put more people.
We're going to need both.
Cost you more.
We're going to need both. But the real scale will come through the automations. And that's how you jump from 200 quotes a week to 5,000 quotes a week. That is the difference. Is not putting 10 times more people. It's actually getting the automations in. And in the last 4 weeks, we're putting a number of automations that have helped us go there. So yes, we look with confidence to the dates that Richard mentioned earlier. They are predicated on this technology continuing to work and new things that we've got in the pipeline.
And I think we've asked this question already and you declined to answer it. Can I just request that you do write to us and explain how much in total you expect it to cost to put the service back up to the acceptable levels? Because I think that's something that when we are doing a post-mortem and looking at similar projects in the future that may well need to have lessons learnt from applied to them, we need to understand what numbers we should be actually looking at in a contract, in a bid for a job of this complexity. And then the final question, you mentioned the technology resource that you've deployed from other parts of the company. What other resource, what other expertise have you used to fix the issues, to get them up, other than the technology?
Yes, so I have an actuarial business, so we've taken our actuarial staff away from other private sector work. We have I have a data business where we've taken the data teams away to go and do the data triage, and again by data I mean member records. And so I have deployed well over 100 of my consultants into the project, and then I have a project management team, and again we have deployed all the resources from the project management team to help coordinate and run everything. So we've taken people from throughout the pensions business, which I think we mentioned earlier serves to over 200 clients. We've taken people throughout the pensions business and brought them into civil service to support. And they are particularly valuable in this case because they have that expertise in the defined benefit pensions market.
Thank you, Luke. Sarah Green, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a very brief when question, following on from Luke's question, but also an exchange earlier, and that's around the surge team's services. So the Minister, in his responses to us earlier, made it very clear that he's determined to recover the cost of those services. So my question is, when will that take place? And we've already had an exchange about whether it starts from the 2nd of February or the April date. I'm assuming part of your answer is linked to determining which date is agreed, but when are you likely to be paying that back?
It refers partly to my previous answer. We have the rectification plan meeting next week. As part of that, we will also be entering into those discussions, negotiations, and on about the rest of the options in the contract that sit there for the government to take. So I don't have a date to give you because I don't specify the date. That will be in negotiation with the government chief commercial officer. And when I say negotiation, I mean he's going to lay out the payment schedule. I think that was in his answer previously. You'll understand as a supplier, we don't dictate when we might pay penalties.
Understood. That's my question.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Catherine, please. We're going to need to speed up because I think we've got to finish before 25.
Yep. Thank you. So I think we've covered a lot, but I just wanted to go back to the comment you made about the surge teams, because I think the point made about you're now in a backlog situation rather than a capacity situation, that would seem to be the exact scenario that you would require a surge team in. And I'm just wondering, is it because we're pressing on the cost of surge being transferred to Capita rather than the government paying? Is that the reason why you're now thinking it's not required?
No, and apologies if that's the way it came across. It was not intended to be coming across. If you look at the search team, the work that the search teams did with Chris's team was divided in 3 sprints. Right? The first sprint was a stabilization, the other one was addressing the urgent cases, and the other one was getting into throughput. Right? So he has and he continues to provide an extremely critical service, particularly in the areas where we've had to have interface with the government departments. There's the connections information, so there's a lot of that they are much better placed to do that, and they've provided an invaluable, absolutely invaluable service. And I couldn't thank Second Permanent Secretary enough for that. As we look forward, we will continue to need search, but the real speed, the real gains, the real scale is going to come through a combination of search and the technology and the automations and the calculations, because those 2 things working together is what is going to allow us to eat into those really painful cases fast enough. That's all I intended to say.
Okay, and you're confident that AI and additional technological capacity is there in the next 2 months to clear the backlog?
Yeah, we've got indeed. Yeah, we've got a number of solutions that have been deployed. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, late. They've been deployed through late May and June. Yeah. Some of them even last weekend. They should have happened before. We got more coming. So, but they are already operational and working. So when we have a little bit more time of all of them working, plus the new ones, some of which are already being tested by our colleagues in our colleagues together with the Cabinet Office, as they get introduced, they will all help.
Okay, and if it doesn't deliver what you intend and what you hope, will you then invest in additional either surge capacity or additional capacity within your own teams to meet that demand, to meet the promises you have made today to clear the backlog?
Yes.
Yes. And just to be clear as well, the estimate of the Cabinet Office, as you will have heard, is that you will fail on 16 of the KPIs. I'm not quite sure whether that's you have already failed in terms of the deadline you have currently reached, or that you will fail, they have anticipated. If you could clarify that, but also clarify what does that mean in terms of the current profitability of this contract for Capita?
So the KPIs are assessed monthly, and we share those. So I believe they're referring to, I think the official was referring to both the failure that's happened and I think they said they can continue to fail. So we report on those monthly, and as we've said, we will not be compliant with those SLAs until we've cleared the backlog, because that's how the SLAs work. The second part of your question was...
Shall I pick up that?
Yeah.
You'll appreciate when you heard the Government Chief Commercial Officer say that we're having payments withheld and 9.9 million plus service rates. We're absolutely not in profit on this contract. And I think I said at the last committee meeting that frankly isn't our focus. I know it's perceived that that's the way we'd operate. And I think the Permanent Secretary of the Cabinet Office said this. The government is a major strategic client for us. So we can't think about profitability here. What we're thinking about is reputation across the rest of the business and how we recover here. So there isn't any profit motive or profit driver in this. This is a restore service, rebuild trust. To the question that I was asked earlier, why would you believe me now? Well, we've got to rebuild that.
Yeah, which is why I picked up on the reference to overspends, because, quite frankly, I think at this stage, given the state of things, I think an overspend would be in order if it's needed to fix things, and it would be good to understand that that's a commitment on Capita's part to overspend on this contract if needed to put things right.
Without, as Adolfo said, there's a bunch of things that are commercial in confidence, but I can assure you there is an overspend.
Right.
And just
we're going to have to speed up.
Okay, but the final question was just about the MacLeod, but has it been raised already?
Not in this session.
Well, just because there are concerns that we're just heading into the next crisis, which is the MacLeod deadline, and presumably the contract you've entered into, given the situation you're currently in and the capacities that you have, we need some reassurance that we're not just going to have this same thing again in 6 months' time when you're not able to meet the legal requirements for MacLeod.
So we are currently in discussions with the Cabinet Office over the MacLeod contract, which, as I believe was stated in the Cabinet Office's evidence, that is a separate contract, it's a separate statement of work. And that separate statement of work is resourced and managed separately from the main contract, and we are currently working through the plan on how to do that.
Okay, I mean that's not very reassuring because they're the same people. They're the same people that are in your current backlog that will end up with the MacLeod backlog as well. In all likelihood, many of them will overlap. So I think you talked about as separate contracts. From where we're concerned, it's our constituents and it's the same people. Yeah. So yeah, we're just flagging that now, and we're hoping we don't have to revisit this.
Absolutely. I think, I guess the point I was trying to make with the separate contract is, one, we haven't signed it yet, so we are working with the Cabinet Office to make sure that it is robust before we sign it. And two, we're not going to leverage the same operational resource. So that's what I mean by separate. I apologise, I didn't.
We're really going to have to speed up now, otherwise we'll run out of time. I'm going to call Charlotte for a brief intervention before Sam, if I can, please.
Thank you. When you talked about you made commitments to clearing the backlog by September, you were quite careful to reference the workable cases you would clear. So there's several hundred, I think you said, of cases that I guess are not workable. When will you clear those ones by?
We will work with the task force to make them workable, i.e. to resolve the dependency that's not entirely within our control, to make them workable, and then as soon as they are, we will work them as fast as possible. I can't give you a guarantee because it's not entirely within my control, but what I can guarantee to you is that we will continue to chase, work with, engage with the departments or whatever third party the case is with, or the departments or the task force on creating the member records that are required to do the calculation. So we will not work on them, as I said earlier, but there are dependencies that are out of my control, so I can't give a commitment. The commitment I can give you is as soon as they're workable, we will work them as fast as possible.
So you must have a project plan and an estimate.
The problem is that if it's, for example, probate, you're waiting for the probate certificate to arrive. That makes it not workable. if you're waiting for a member to submit a death certificate, it's not workable until they submit the death certificate. So in terms of a project plan, yes, I mean, we have them very firmly gathered in the awaiting third-party input, and we know line by line what we're waiting for from that. And as Chris said, we use HMRC surge resources where it involves departments to help chase that data down to make them workable. So that's why it's not a very empathetic way of describing it, but it's the elements where you can't put the member into payment because you're waiting for something else in order to complete the calculation, sort dates out, etc., etc.
And you are actively looking for that information?
Absolutely, because it's part of our clearing the SLAs and clearing the backlog.
Thank you, Charlotte. Sam, please.
Thank you. So could you outline your understanding of the circumstances and level of service failure under which your contract could be terminated?
We do. We understand.
And could you outline those levels to the committee?
Well, I think that's a matter that I think the Chief Commercial Officer this morning mentioned. It would be irresponsible for me to comment. This is up to the Cabinet Office to go and proceed ahead if that's what they wanted. My job today is to ensure that every resource, every effort, management time is devoted to fixing this, and then there will be other forums and other opportunities to talk about anything else commercial.
It is very well defined in the contract, but forgive us, the contract runs to 30 odd pages. We don't have it with us, and I don't have the capacity to know it all. But we're very happy to send those elements to you so you can see them, because it's very clearly laid out.
I think that will be helpful for us to see. Would you accept that the issues so far have constituted a critical performance failure?
Sorry, could you speak up?
Would you accept that the issues so far have constituted a critical performance failure?
I think you heard this from the Government Chief Commercial Officer. We are in default on the contract. We know that, and that's why we're involved in the rectification plan.
I want to pick up on one brief question in terms of the technology that Catherine asked just now. Mr. Hernandez, a few moments ago you said that the way we're going to get out of this situation is through the deployment of the technology. And just earlier on, Mr. Clements, you said that earlier you'd been having technology problems. Can you tell us in more detail what went wrong with the deployment of the technology that stopped it being deployed as you promised when bidding for the contract, and what specific issues you've now resolved that gives you confidence that you'll be able to deploy it going forwards?
I'll give you an overview of what it was, and then we can get into some of the specifics that broke down. So the solution was built on the system, the technology called HardLink, that is in production over 200 customers. It works with some of the largest defined benefits pensions. And then we built a front end on top of a Microsoft solution for the portal. And then the work was, how do you get the two to connect? And how do you build something that offers the Microsoft CRM capabilities that give you the digital journey for the member and for the employer, as well as the resilience of the back end. That's effectively what we built. And then there were going to be a number of calculations and automations that were going to be built into the system to allow the throughput to happen. During last year, in 2025, it took us longer than expected to get those two systems to talk. And that would be some of the milestones, but then we cut it back.
On that specifically, I mean, surely this is not unusual that you have to have a front end for a pension scheme. So is that not something that you designed in advance, or why did you have trouble getting it to talk?
Well, it was done. It needed to be secured, it needed to be tested, and it needed to work. The challenge we had in going live on that day, on December 1st, is the volumes were multiple times what was expected. We had allocated 50% more licenses than we thought we were going to have concurrent users. Right? We just thought, let's make a contingency, let's put 50%. It turned out that 50% wasn't enough. So the Microsoft system collapsed. It took us a couple of days to get it back up with all the new licenses, and then it was resolved. So we got that to work, but where we failed short was in the calculations, right? The calculations and the automations. We should have had those ready by March. We didn't. We were working under stress and a lot of strain on all the issues that we had encountered. And those things that should have happened by the end of March ended up happening in May. But they are now being deployed and they're already operational. So there's been a very impactful delay, but the technology is now coming together.
And I think we'll perhaps dig into that further in the future. But just finally, we talked to the Cabinet Office just now around the potential for them to insource the contract. And just now you were telling us how badly the data transfer went when you took it over from MyCSP. So what reassurance can you give us that if the government does decide to insource this contract, you won't essentially pull the same trick and you will ensure there is a complete data transfer in the easiest way possible?
So first of all, contractually, the Cabinet Office has unfettered access to everything, right? So there's not going to be that. But above that, we are in this business of solving and managing complex problems on behalf of the government when the government so decides. And as part of that, sometimes we take from some other providers, sometimes we give it back, sometimes, and we will do that to perfection. We will, if that was come to pass, we will work professionally, hand over, do a tripartite, as we're doing today, for example, in teachers, where we're working with the new provider, with the Department of Education, and being totally transparent and giving total access to backlog, total access to data. We will do everything that we can to avoid that anybody has to go through the pain we've gone.
And if I may, to be clear, it wasn't the data migration itself, it is the membership records contained within the data. The data migration was conducted successfully. We received the records that were there. Those records that were there don't have all the information we need to do the calculations. So, but the actual act of transitioning the data, that was completed correctly.
I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there because we're out of time. Can I thank our witnesses very much? This was bound to be a slightly difficult session. Can I appeal to you, Adolfo, that when you make that rectification plan, you stick to the promises made within it, because there's nothing worse than you keep coming before this committee, making a promise, and then it's broken. We really want to see these pensions paid to those people who are entitled to get them in a reasonable time. So we look forward to seeing that rectification plan from the Cabinet Office. But can I thank you very much for coming today, all of you. The uncorrected version of the transcript will be up in the next few days. We will then carefully consider the evidence that you've given us today and the Cabinet Office have given us, and then decide how to take that forward, no doubt after we've seen the rectification plan. So thank you again. Order, order.